Hey guys, welcome to Pocket Saga. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Ash returned to Kalos for Greninja, Part 1. Before starting, if you are interested in Pokemon fanfictions, you can consider subscribing this channel and like this video, that will help a lot. Now let's dive in. Here's a short summary. Ash is having the time of his life in Alola. Meanwhile, something dark is brewing back in Kalos. Greninja stumbles upon something terrifying and tries to warn Ash. It all gets much worse from there before it gets any better. Now let's get to the story. There it was. The place it had been looking for. The mysterious, secluded compound from where humans dressed in gray were occasionally coming out and disappearing into the surrounding forests. The place must have been operational for a while now. It looked new but certainly not unfinished. It was only one floor tall, but it was very likely there would be many more levels underground. The low ceiling and unassuming brownish-gray color of the walls made the building very difficult to spot. Uphill in its hiding spot, Greninja sat down and frowned. Finally, it had found the origin place of the gray people who, at least that's what Greninja suspected, had been causing trouble all over Kalos. But just seeing the compound hadn't answered any of its question, only created more. Greninja leaned against a tree, stretching its weary legs straight in front of it, settling in for a long wait. After a few days of observing, it had become obvious that everything about this place was organized to the maximum efficiency. Every night, a small group of humans would run into the forest and usually return the next morning, carrying large bags, metal boxes or other loads. Greninja didn't know for certain what they were collecting during the nights, but it had its suspicions and they weren't anything good. It just had to prove them right. By the evening of the fifth day, Greninja was getting restless. It hadn't yet seen anything that would prove these people were criminals, but it didn't know what else it could do by itself against this big of an operation. It needed some advice. And there was only one person in the world it could ask right there and then. Reluctantly, Greninja closed its eyes, focusing its mind, and reached out to Ash. It had been a long time since they had connected on purpose, and it took a while until it started to feel the familiar hum of Ash's mind. And then it wasn't a hum anymore, it was a crash, a flood. The thoughts and feelings that poured out of Ash were strange and confused, somewhat disconnected. Greninja felt overwhelmed and struggled to focus. It felt like it was drowning, the incoherence from Ash unbearable. Greninja fell to the ground, shaking and panting, and forced the connection to break. Minutes later, only after it had completely calmed down, it understood. Ash had been sleeping. With this distance, the bond connection had always been quite unstable and weak, and even that was when both of them were focusing on sustaining it. Usually they could share a few thoughts and a visual of their surroundings, not much else. It was far from the absolute harmony it felt with Ash when they were battling together. No, that was something else. This, however, had been a complete disaster. Greninja wondered what time it was in Alola, and if it had unintentionally woken Ash up in the middle of the night. At least it had to have disturbed his sleep. Focusing on the connection took huge amounts of energy, especially when it didn't work quite right. Greninja could feel the exhaustion in its bones. It was frustrated by its failure. It was clear it would be on its own for now. Defeated, Greninja watched the compound for a while longer, but there was nothing going on. Its eyes drooped, and it settled against the now very familiar tree. It wouldn't hurt to sleep for a few hours, right? Greninja woke up to a loud scream. It rushed up, leaning to watch over the surrounding rocks down to the compound. It was early morning, the light just beginning to show over the low mountains, lighting the area in an almost eerie way, casting long shadows across the ground. And right in the middle of the grounds, Greninja could see what was causing the trouble. Another Greninja, weak and beaten, had broken out of one of the humans' bags and was trying to run away. A group of people gathered around it, taking battle stances and calling out their Pokemon. The wild Greninja attacked the group with Water Shuriken, but it didn't have its full strength and the attack was easily deflected. One of the humans called out a giant Pangoro. It seemed obvious the fight was going to be over before it had even started. But Greninja wasn't just going to watch its own get beaten and taken prisoner. It leapt over the rocks, rushing down the mountainside at full speed. When it was near but not yet spotted by the humans, it called up Double Team, creating multiple copies of itself. That's when it got the attention and the group turned to watch it approach. As it got even closer, it could see the fear on the humans' faces, and the relief on the Greninjas. The group scattered, and few of the humans even ran away shouting. Greninja dropped the double team. It threw the shuriken from its back with full power, hitting the Pangoro full on. The fighting Pokémon fell back, and the captured Greninja had a chance to jump back and out of the way. Greninja slid in front of it, ready for a battle. That was when something flashed in the low morning light. Something was flying towards it. Greninja only had time to raise its hands for a move, but it was too late. The metal circle snapped around its waist and locked up tight, releasing an electric current so strong it forced Greninja to its knees. It struggled and tried to pull on the metallic band, but it wouldn't move. The Greninja behind it, the one it had tried to protect, had also been locked up with similar band. It lay on the ground, unconscious. A man approached. Furious, Greninja turned to face him. It was ready to get up and fight despite the electric band. It could, if it had to. Then the shadow fell from the man's face and revealed someone Greninja had hoped, more than anything, it would never see again. Well, if it isn't the infamous Greninja, drawled Lysandre, a pleased grin stretching his newly scarred face. But where is our dear boy Ash? Professor Kukui was already halfway done with preparing breakfast when he saw Ash finally crawling down from the loft. He called good morning, but only heard grumbling as an answer. Kukui shrugged in mild amusement. Ash was usually quite hyper from the moment he woke up, but today was apparently a different story. Still smiling, Kukui brought the plates to the table. He took a good look at Ash and stopped. Ash looked completely, utterly exhausted. His hair was more of a mess than usual, eyes reddish and posture slumped. He sat quietly on the couch, staring vacantly at the two Lovedisk who were idly swimming in their tank. At first, Kukui figured Ash must have been running outside through the night against his best advice, but quickly scrapped that theory. Pikachu seemed well rested, and Kukui couldn't imagine Ash going out without his best friend. Kukui set the plates on the table and sat down opposite of Ash. "What's with you, Ash?" he questioned kindly. "Did you sleep at all? You aren't sick, are you?" Ash turned to face him and forced a tired smile. "Oh, don't worry, Professor, I'm not sick," he said and began on his breakfast. After a few bites of food, his smile got more real. "Wow, so good." Kukui waited for a moment longer for any explanation, but it seemed Ash wasn't going to tell him. He seemed fine now, but Kukui could see Pikachu too, instead of munching down its breakfast, was watching Ash a little bit more intensely than usual. Kukui let Ash eat for a while, but when he started to slow down, Kukui prompted. "So, how come you seem so tired today? I hope you weren't staying up during the night?" Ash paused, frowned. He set his spoon down and rubbed his eyes. "No, I just had a really weird dream," he eventually said. All the earlier enthusiasm was gone, and the vacant look was creeping back into his eyes. Pikachu jumped on his lap, whispering a quiet "Peekaw." Ash stared at his partner, petting its sides gently. When he continued, his voice was so quiet Kukui barely heard him. "I think it was, I felt." Pikachu nodded like it understood something. Ash took a deep breath and grinned. "I dunno, Professor. It was just a strange dream." He jumped up. "Oh man, I really should get ready. I don't want to be late from school." Looking everywhere but at Kukui, he ran off and up the ladder, starting to prepare himself and his Pokémon for the day. Kukui looked after him in mild concern. He was finishing putting away dishes when he thought he heard Ash's low voice coming from the loft. "Yeah, Pikachu," he was saying. "I think it was Greninja, no, I'm not sure. It was so weird. I was just sleeping, and then it was like whoosh. There were all these images and thoughts in my head and I felt like I was gonna puke." Kukui could hear Pikachu speaking frantically for a moment until Ash continued. "I'm okay, Pikachu. I dunno what it wanted, it was too confusing. I don't think it was anything too serious. It didn't seem hurt or anything like that. Hey Rollit, I'm gonna put you in my bag now." Kukui frowned. Something was definitely going on with Ash. He might need to pay a little extra attention to him for now. 3 hours later, Ash was trying his best not to fall asleep in the middle of the class. He was feeling a lot better than when he first woke up that morning, but there was still a constant nagging feeling in the back of his mind that Greninja might be in trouble. After Greninja and Ash had separated in Kalos, they had only used the bond connection 2 times. First time was when Ash let Greninja know he was going to be living in Alola. Few months later, Greninja informed Ash that the trouble with the giant rock and its remaining roots seemed to be over. In conclusion, they only did it when it was absolutely necessary. And last night, Greninja had attempted it once again. They had perfected the bond phenomenon back in Kalos, and Greninja was able to stay in Ash Greninja form without any effort. But when they actively used the connection, it suddenly felt similar to when they were battling together. All at once, they were stronger. They could see through each other's eyes, feel each other's thoughts. It was serenity and chaos at the same time. And it always left them absolutely, completely worn out. Ash didn't fully understand how it worked. And neither had Professor Sycamore, not really, but it was instinctual to Ash and Greninja. But this time, Greninja had rushed into the connection, not realizing Ash was asleep before it was too late. Ash was sure it had affected Greninja the same way it had him. So as curious and impatient as he was to find out what was going on, he knew it would be better to wait until the next day to try again. "Ash, are you feeling all right?" asked Professor Kukui. Ash jumped up on his seat. He hadn't realized he had been zoning out during a class. "Yeah, you looked kinda sleepy just then," teased Sophocles, pretty identical to Rollet there. On Ash's desk, Rollet happily slept on. Ash grinned and rubbed his neck in embarrassment. "Sorry. I guess I'm still pretty tired. I didn't sleep too good." Mallow turned sideways on her seat and leaned in interest. "Oh, what kept you up?" "Ah, did you have a bad dream?" joked Lana, making a mock sad face. "Hey, everyone has bad dreams sometimes," commented Lily quietly. "I bet he was training through the night like an idiot," grumbled Kiave. He raised his chin and straightened his back. "You know, my grandfather always said, one should dedicate their nights to resting and recharging, and their days to training and self-improvement. That is the best way to get stronger." Lana rolled her eyes. Ash really wanted to raise to the bait but was too exhausted to. Instead, he turned back to Professor Kukui and found him watching him closely. Ash shrugged, still embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Professor, I'll try to pay attention." Kukui didn't break his stare. "Maybe we should have a small break," he said instead. "It's been a long lesson. Let's go outside for a minute and get some fresh air and exercise. Everyone, be back in 10 minutes. Relieved to get a break, the kids, followed by the professor, quickly filed out of the classroom. Ash hung back, hunched over his desk, pretending to read the current chapter from their study material. Out of nowhere, he had started getting some intense feelings from Greninja. Not yet anything visual or clear, but he could tell it was agitated and preparing for a battle. Trough the confusion, Ash noticed Pikachu was watching him. It had hopped on the desk, almost standing on the book Ash was trying and failing to focus on. Ash attempted a reassuring smile, but his heart was beating a mile a minute and he could feel Greninja charging into a fight. Pikapi, murmured Pikachu, sounding worried. It nudged his hand and Ash realized he was clenching his fists so tightly his fingernails were biting into his palms. He tried to relax his tense shoulders, but it felt like he wasn't completely in control of his own body anymore. "Something's wrong," he whispered. Pikachu perked up, leaning closer. "Greninjas, it was fine a minute ago but now, it's fighting." Suddenly, there came a voice right beside him. "What is going on, Ash? Who is this Greninja?" Ash startled so badly he physically jumped from his chair and backed off. The chair clattered to the floor. Ash was few steps away when he realized it was just Kukui, hovering over him visibly concerned. He could see the professor first drawing back in shock, and then ducking his head and opening his arms in a reassuring way. Like Ash was a wild animal. "Ash?" he asked, his voice suddenly very gentle. Ash felt terrible. He was also way too disoriented to have this conversation right now. "It's Professor, it's fine," he blurted, backing away again. "I just need a minute." He turned on his heels and took a step, and stumbled. His knees hit the floor and all breath was knocked from his body. At first, irrationally, he thought Pikachu had hit him with a thunderbolt. But that had never been this painful. When he forced his eyes open, he could see Professor Kukui kneeling in front of him, talking frantically. He could feel Pikachu pushing on his leg. But there was no air in his lungs and no way to control his convulsing limbs. So, when Greninja initiated the bond connection, there was no available decision for him to make. Ash's brain gladly accepted the escape. To shut this world off and move on to watch the world through Greninja's eyes. Kukui poured himself a cup of coffee and sighed. Feeling uncharacteristically pensive, he leaned on the balcony railing. It had been an unusual day. He looked down on the yard, where he could see his students sitting on the grass in a loose circle. All of them expect. Ash hadn't left for the break? Abandoning his coffee on the railing, Kukui marched back through the hallway into the classroom. And sure enough, there Ash was still sitting, frowning at his book. Kukui was certain he wasn't actually reading. Pikachu stood on the desk, and even though Kukui couldn't see its face, he was quite sure the Pokémon was trying to get Ash to look at it. Rowlet had rolled off the desk and was snoozing on the floor next to his feet. "I thought you were the one most in need of a break," Kukui commented in a light tone. He wasn't mad at Ash, but the kid was definitely acting strange. Even if he were exhausted, Ash never missed a chance to go outside, especially during school hours. Kukui leaned on the doorframe, a fond smile on his lips, though that didn't last for long. Kukui wasn't sure what reaction he had been expecting, but it had not been this. There was no reaction. Neither the boy nor his Pokémon showed any signs they had even heard him. The strange feeling of uneasiness came back from the morning. Kukui approached his student, repeating his name. He could hear Pikachu's mumbled "Pika, Pikapi," and Ash's soft whimper. Then, he spoke. Kukui had heard something about a Greninja back home, and now Ash was speaking of it again. The kid sounded so strained that Kukui couldn't help but demand answers. He regretted it immediately. The professor had never seen Ash react so badly. He jumped off his chair, backing off like he thought Kukui would attack him. His eyes were wide and scared, and he didn't seem to be entirely aware of his surroundings. Startled, Kukui did his best to appear less threatening, while Pikachu screamed and Rowlet, waking up to the noise, flew straight up in the air screeching. It had no idea what was going on. Kukui felt very much the same. After a few horrible seconds, there was finally recognition in Ash's eyes. He babbled something about being fine, turned for the door, and promptly collapsed on his knees. His arms flew around for a second before constricting tightly against his sides. There was no sound. It looked like he couldn't even draw a breath. Pikachu reacted first. It had dashed down on the floor and to Ash's side before Kukui even had back the brainpower to do anything but stare in shock. Finally, he forced himself to move. He rushed around the desk to kneel in front of Ash. His eyes were screwed shut and all the color had washed from his face. "Ash? Ash, can you hear me?" Kukui exclaimed. "What's wrong? Are you hurt, Ash?" After a long minute, Ash's eyes opened a fraction. For a while, he just stared at Kukui, gasping for breath. Then he swayed, relaxing the tiniest bit. Kukui gently took hold of his shoulders, ready to support him. Ash, finally taking his first deep breath, fell limply in Kukui's arms. Kukui was running. Well, he was panicking. But he was also running, with only one thing in his mind: get help. He had stayed with Ash for a while, but when there was no change in his condition, Kukui had left him in a recovery position with Pikachu and Rowlet and ran off to find someone. There usually was a nurse on the school grounds during the days, but he had no idea where she could be. So, he ran to the next person he could think of. He slammed the principal's door open without knocking. "Samson, I need help." "Kukui?" Samson Oak stood up from his chair, a stack of papers slipping from his limp fingers. "What is going on?" Kukui leaned on the door frame, panting. It's Ash. He's sick, or he collapsed." "When was this?" Oak questioned, already rounding the table. "Just now," Kukui said, taking deep breaths and trying to calm down. "Do you know where Nurse Jill is?" Oak nodded. "Probably at the cafeteria. I'll go get her." "Go back to Ash." Kukui agreed, feeling more focused now that he wasn't alone. He started back to the classroom. Rounding a corner, he almost crashed into someone. They barely managed to dodge each other and stopped in shock. It was Kiave. "Professor," he shouted. "I was just looking for you. Something's wrong with Ash." "Shit," though Kukui, their break ended. "I know," he said. "Professor Oak is getting the nurse. Let's go back to the classroom." They hurried back, and found Ash still on the ground, surrounded by all his classmates and their Pokémon. Sophocles and Lily sat back and looked near to tears. Lana was quiet but determined and Mallow was actually leaning on Ash, checking his vitals. When they spotted Kukui and Kiave arriving, Lily shot up. He's not waking up, she wailed. Professor. Rotom Dex appeared from somewhere behind her, screen showing a panicked expression. Professor Kukui. I only left him for a few minutes. I have no data of what happened, I'm sorry. Kukui didn't want to worry them any further, so he tried to appear as calm as he could. It was hard, but he managed. I know, it's okay. He said kindly. He's going to be fine. The nurse is coming any minute now. What's wrong with him? Asked Lana. We don't know yet, Kukui said. He shooed Togedemaru and Poplio a bit further away and kneeled on the other side of Ash. He looked at Mallow. How's he doing? Mallow worried her lip for a moment and shrugged. He doesn't seem to have fever or anything. I don't think he's even unconscious. He moves around a bit and I think he spoke something a minute ago. It's almost like he's sleeping and just not waking up from it. Pika, said Pikachu quietly. It was cradling Ash's head, trying to gently wake him up in its own way. Kukui's heart hurt looking at it. It's going to be fine, he thought, pushing down his fear. It has to be. When Ash opened his eyes, he was not in Alola anymore. He was in a dimly lit room with gray walls and not much furniture. He tried to move, but soon the last few hours came back to him and he realized he was currently, somehow, seeing through Greninja's eyes. Where even was Greninja? Why was it in a place like this? A lash of thought from Greninja quieted Ash's wondering. You need to see this, it seemed to say. Ash did his best to calm down and just ease into the flow of their bond. He heard a door open behind them, and someone walked in. I apologize deeply for this treatment, an eerily familiar voice said. Greninja turned its head, and Ash felt his heart skip a beat in terror. Lysandre. The man was dressed in a black and gray pinstripe suit and his red hair was as crazy as ever. But his face was different. There was serious scarring on the right side of his face, all over his cheek up to his mouth. It made his distinct face look crooked and scarier than ever. Let me just make this clear. I don't want to hurt you, but I need to know a few things. Lysandre was saying. The less stubborn you act, the quicker we get this over with. Ash felt Greninja go tense and its low growl could be heard in the room. Wondering why it didn't attack, Ash soon realized the Pokémon was chained to a chair, and felt his own anger flare up. I can clearly see you are in your Bond evolved form, so there is no point denying it. Is your trainer here in Kalos? Lysandre studied Greninja carefully. I can't imagine he would let you get captured like this and not do anything about it. How far away can you be from each other and still stay connected? Ignoring him, Greninja turned its head and stared at the opposite wall. Lysandre walked around it. Ash could tell he was getting frustrated. You must know where he is, Lysandre demanded. He pulled out a rolled-up paper from a shelf behind him. He carefully straightened it, revealing a map of all the regions. Just point here in which region he is. Greninja stared at the map, carefully moving its eyes over all the regions to not reveal Ash's true location. It shifted to look at Lysandre. I promise I'm not planning to hurt him, Lysandre said. I just need to talk to him. Ask him about a few things. It's not going to be like last time. And I already apologized for that, didn't I? Ash could feel Greninja thinking. Planning, but he couldn't quite make out for what. You only need to point out his general location, and my team will do the rest, Lysandre urged. Agreed? There was a tense silence, after which, to Ash's horror, Greninja nodded. Lysandre's grin was terrifying. Excellent, he said. I will release one of your arms now. Do not even think about doing anything with it except pointing at this map. Greninja nodded again. Sparing one more look at it, Lysandre leaned over and pressed a chip of some sort on one of the cuffs. There was a low buzzing sound, and the cuff popped open. Greninja moved so fast it was a blur. With all the power it could muster, it slammed the heel of its palm to Lysandre's chest and sent him flying across the room. Ash could feel his own heartbeat pick up. Use cut, he urged, and Greninja agreed. It created the knife-like move on its hand and slashed at the chain, keeping it in place. It only took few tries, and they were free. Greninja rushed up and faced Lysandre. The man was just getting up from the floor, visibly shaken. Also, visibly angry. You damn Pokémon, he hissed. How stupid can you be? We will find out where Ash is, with or without your help. It would have just been easier for everyone if you... He didn't get to finish, as Greninja threw the shuriken from its back with such precision it slammed Lysandre back against the wall. He slid down on the floor, whimpering. Greninja turned and walked out of the room. Unfortunately, it didn't get far until two goons in gray outfits ran around the corner and blocked the way. Seeing the loose prisoner, they called out their Pokémon. A Houndoom and a Drapion. Nurse Jill stood up and just looked down at Ash for a moment. Everyone was holding their breaths. "I'm sorry," she began. They could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "I can't tell you what is wrong with him. His heart and lungs sound normal. He doesn't have a fever and doesn't appear to have any visible head trauma. He is not even properly unconscious. From what you told me about his actions just before, Professor Kukui, this could possibly be some type of epileptic seizure. But it's nothing I have ever seen before. For now, we can only make him comfortable and see if anything changes. Also, it would be advisable to find out if he has a history of seizures or other illnesses." Kukui tugged at his hair. He could already imagine the calls to Ash's mother. "All right, thank you. We should probably move him to the recovery room next to your office." Nurse Jill nodded. "I'll go ahead and prepare the bed for him." After she left, Kukui turned to his class. He was met with a crowd of anxious kids and Pokémon. "School is over for today," he said. "I know you are all worried and want to help, but Ash doesn't need us all hovering around him." "But Professor, we can't just leave him. I want to help." "Togedemaru Toge." Kukui raised his hands and his voice. "I will stay here and see that he is fine. You all need to go home." He turned to Rotom Dex before it could interject. "You too, Rotom Dex." "What? But Professor, I can help Nurse Jill with my extensive data. I have experience with first aid," argued Mallow. Kukui shot them a look that made the whole group quiet down and bow their heads. "I'm not arguing about this." He crouched next to Pikachu, who was still curled next to his partner's head. It stared back, a warning in its eyes. "You can stay, of course," he said, and Pikachu relaxed some. On the floor, Ash was shaking his head slightly, mumbling something Kukui couldn't make out. With a deep breath, Kukui rolled his shoulders. "All right, I'm going to pick him up now. Let's get him to bed." With Ash's help, Greninja put up a good fight, but it was hurt and exhausted, and it was 2 against 1. The battle went on for a while, until suddenly the goons stopped and grinned. Warily, Greninja turned around. Lysandre was standing behind it, holding something that looked like a remote controller. He was furious. "You do remember that little band around your waist, I assume?" he sneered. Greninja glanced down and Ash could see a smooth metal ring going around its body. "That's right. I tried to be nice. I tried to tell you I didn't want to hurt you. But you must have known I wouldn't just let you leave, and yet you still resisted?" He pressed on the controller, just for a second, so that Greninja and Ash could feel the painful shock spike through their body. Grimacing, it fell to one knee. "Just obey him," Ash pleaded. "Tell him where I am. I don't want him to hurt you." Greninja very angrily disagreed. Its whole body shaking, it rose back up to both feet. "Please, Greninja," Ash begged. "Don't." Lysandre sighed. "As you wish." He pushed hard on the controller, and Ash's world faded white. Ash woke up with a start. He stared up at a wooden ceiling. He had no idea where he was. His body felt like it had been run over by a herd of toros. Actually, he knew what that felt like, and this was worse. What had happened? "Greninja." Ash gasped and scrambled to sit up on the bed. Suddenly, he felt lightheaded and there was a gripping tightness in his chest. He tried to push himself completely up but couldn't get his arms working properly. "Pikapi." Through his panic, Ash recognized his best friend's voice. He stopped moving, looking down. Pikachu had jumped on his lap and was pawing worriedly at his stomach. Pikachu." Ash opened his arms and hugged it tightly. "Pikachu, oh man." From the corner of his eye, he could see the door of the room open and someone rushing in. Ash raised his head and was met with the wide eyes of Professor Kukui. "Ash, you have woken up," he exclaimed, dropping down beside the bed. "How are you feeling? Please, lie back down." Ash stared at him, confused. Carefully, he scooted back and leaned against the back wall, lowering Pikachu back on his lap. He was still feeling extremely anxious about Greninja and Lysandre, but the present situation forced him to push it back. "I'm fine," he slowly said. What even happened? Kukui frowned. That's what we are trying to figure out. Do you have any chronic illnesses? Have you ever experienced seizures before? Seizures? Ash swallowed. He could still feel the phantom pain from Lysandre's device, but that had been done to Greninja, right? I don't think so. Pika, was I unconscious? Ash asked. His chest still felt tight and he took a deep breath. What did I do? Kukui looked even more worried. What is the last thing you remember? Greninja getting hurt, Ash thought, and the world faded. He tried to focus on Kukui's voice, but his vision swam and there was something pressing on his chest. He stared past Pikachu at his shaking hands. Greninja, Ash. Kukui's voice was far away, muffled. Hey, just hang in there, the doctor is almost here. Pikapi. Ears buzzing and heart racing, Ash showed Pikachu and his blanket aside and pushed himself out of the bed. I have to go, he said. What? Ash, hold on. He set his bare feet on the carpet and stood up. The room was just a blur of colors and he stumbled on thin air, falling on all fours. He started crawling towards the door. I'm sorry, I gotta help Greninja. Someone was grabbing him around the waist and hefting him up. He lashed out, but there was no strength in it. Nurse Jill. Kukui's voice shouted. Somehow, Ash was back on the bed. Kukui was leaning over him, holding his shoulders firmly. He was talking. Hey, just take a deep breath. Ash. You are okay. Just breathe with me. Eventually, Ash started to understand the words, taking deep breaths with Kukui. He stared up at the professor, feeling his body slowly relaxing and his pulse going down. Kukui. Asked a female voice. How is Ash? I think he's fine now. Have you got the thermometer? He feels a bit hot. Yeah, just here. Thank you. Ash felt Pikachu on his side, leaning on his rib cage. His eyes drooped, and the conversation faded to the background. An insistent thought came to him. He cracked his eyes back open and looked at Kukui's vague direction. Call Professor Sycamore. He mumbled. Tell him, Lysandre is back. If Kukui answered, he didn't hear it. Kukui nervously rapped his fingers on the desk while he waited for the call to connect. Professor Sycamore, the brilliant Pokemon professor in Kalos. They had met once in a conference, but that had been years ago. And now he was calling him. The screen beeped, and an unfamiliar face appeared on the monitor. It was a young man with dark hair and tired, serious blue eyes. Hi, my name is Professor Kukui. Kukui greeted. I was calling for Professor Sycamore? Something dark flashed in the man's eyes. Sorry, he is not here. Oh, when is he back? I can call later. Don't bother, he won't be back in a while. The man looked to the side, clearly distressed. I need to go. Taken aback, Kukui sat up straighter. Hold on, this cannot wait. Are you his assistant? Do you know someone called Lysandre? The young man paused and turned to look at him in clear shock. What do you mean? It wasn't an answer, but Kukui could tell he knew. He decided to press on. Do you know Ash? Ash Ketchum? Something changed in the man's appearance. He leaned in, eyes going wide. Ash? Is he okay? Wait, who did you say you were, again? Well, that was an interesting reaction. Kukui smiled thinly. Professor Kukui, from the Alola region, and you are? The man still looked wary, but less so about Kukui himself. I'm Alon. I'm taking care of Professor Sycamore's lab for now. Where is he, then? Kukui asked. What about Ash? Alon countered. Is he there? With you? Kukui frowned. I really need to talk to the professor. There was frustration in Alon's eyes, in the tilt of his mouth. I already told you, he is not available. His lab got broken in and he was attacked. Badly. Professor Sycamore is in the hospital. Now it was Kukui's turn to stare at the other in shock. What? When did this happen? Alon lowered his eyes. Few weeks ago. He looked back up, anxious. Is this about Ash? Please tell me he is okay. Why did you ask about Lysandre? Yes, Ash is here in Alola. He is okay now, but I'm not completely sure what happened. I think he had a dream or something similar. He fell unconscious for a while and woke up distressed. He mentioned someone called Lysandre. And a Pokemon called Greninja. Do you know something about this? Alon seemed visibly relieved after hearing this. Yes, Greninja was is Ash's Pokemon he had here in Kalos. And Lysandre was. You must have heard of the Kalos crisis? Lysandre was the head of that operation. He wanted to destroy the world as it is now. Kukui nodded thoughtfully. He had heard of the crisis, but as it had happened so far away, he hadn't really paid attention to the details. All right, he said. To give you some context, Ash is my student here on Mele Mele Island. He is staying with me. He was acting strangely this morning and mentioned Greninja multiple times. Then, during class, he got worse and had some sort of a fit. He was unresponsive for so long we had to call for a doctor. Alon gazed at him silently, and when he woke up, he started panicking. He tried to leave and said he had to help Greninja. Then, he said that Lysandre is back. Kukui had never seen anyone look as terrified as Alon looked at that moment. How did it go? Exhausted beyond his limit, Kukui lowered himself on Professor Oak's sofa and leaned back with a deep sigh. It's worse than I could have imagined, he said. Few weeks ago, Professor Sycamore's lab was broken into and he got attacked. He is in the hospital. I talked to his friend, Alon. Apparently, Ash has quite the history in Kalos. Especially with what happened during the crisis. Oak raised his eyebrows. The crisis? From last year? Yes. He and his Pokemon, Greninja, they can do this strange variation of the Mega Evolution. Professor Sycamore named it, Bond Phenomenon. Oak gave him a look. Kukui shook his head. I know, I hadn't heard of that either. Apparently almost no one has. Ash came up with it by himself and basically only Alon, Sycamore and few of his traveling companions know about it. Anyway, he used the Bond evolution in the Kalos League and attracted the attention of Lysandre, who was the head of this group called Team Flare. Oak got a look of understanding in his eyes. Team Flare was behind the crisis. Kukui nodded. As far as Alon knows, Lysandre died in the final battle and most of his team were arrested. But now it seems like he might actually be alive and planning something new. But how would Ash suddenly know about that? The principal asked. And that is the question, Kukui said. Alon only knows the basics of what Ash can do with Greninja. But he didn't completely dismiss the idea that maybe somehow, through their bond, Greninja told this to Ash. Oak looked as skeptical as Kukui felt, but he didn't argue. I guess we will have to ask him ourselves when he wakes up again. I guess, agreed Kukui wearily. Oh, also, you should know what the burglars stole from Professor Sycamore. Professor Oak's eyes got dark. Let me guess. His research about the Bond phenomenon. Kukui's look of barely contained dread was an answer enough. When Ash woke up the next time, he felt slightly less like he was going to burst from anxiety. Slowly, he opened his eyes and looked around. He still didn't recognize the room, but from what he could see through the window, he assumed he might still be somewhere in the Pokemon school. It had gotten dark outside, and he idly wondered how long he had slept. There was a warm weight on his chest and he raised his hand, petting Pikachu's fur gently. It didn't wake up and Ash wasn't about to disturb it, so he let his head fall back on the pillow and just relaxed. He was trying his best not to think about Greninja and Lysandre. It was hard, though. The bond had broken between him and Greninja, so he no longer had any awareness what was going on with it and whether it was okay. He was just so worried, so terrified, that something irreversible had happened to Greninja and that was why they were no longer connected. Realistically, he tried to convince himself, Greninja was way too valuable for Lysandre to harm it permanently. The break had probably happened because the bond had been stretched to its limit by Lysandre, and Ash had fallen unconscious. That was how it had happened back before they had perfected to bond, after all. But it didn't help the slightest with the gnawing, consuming fear. Ash cursed himself for being so weak. When Greninja had needed him the most, he had let it down. He must have moved or let out a sound, since Pikachu's ears twitched, and it raised its head, looking at Ash with bleary eyes. Pikapi. It said happily and crawled closer to his face, nuzzling his chin. Ash smiled and wrapped his hands around it. Pikachu. He whispered. I'm sorry I made you worry. I'm fine now, but He had to stop, feeling his breath catch in his throat, his eyes burned. I'm scared, Pikachu, he admitted quietly. For a moment, he just looked to the side, blinking. Greninja is in big trouble. Lysandre is planning something, and he needs me for it. He's gonna come for me, Pikachu. Pi Pika, Pikachu! Exclaimed Pikachu. It looked concerned, but also angry, determined. It wasn't going to let Lysandre win that easily. Knowing it was on his side, all the way to the end, made Ash feel slightly better. There was not much else, Ash thought, that mattered at this moment. In a quiet tone, laying on the warm bed, Pikachu in his arms, he told it everything he had seen through Greninja's eyes. Pikachu said very little throughout, but Ash could tell it was hanging on to his every word, concerned and disturbed. When he was done, he sat up on the bed and rubbed his eyes. He was starting to feel quite hungry and very thirsty. His head was pounding, and his muscles felt sore. There was a glass of water on the bedside table next to few bottles of some meds he didn't recognize, and he reached for it. He tried to grip on the glass, but when he lifted it, his fingers were weak and it slipped through, crashing on the floorboards. Pika! Oh man, groaned Ash. There was water everywhere, soaking the edge of the carpet and pooling under the table. Wearily, Ash climbed up from the bed and went around the room, looking for any tissues or a towel. He was rummaging through a drawer, when the door opened and a nurse in pastel blue clothes peeked in. Ash? She asked. When she spotted him, she smiled brightly. You are awake. How are you feeling? Much better, thanks, Ash said. What time is it? The nurse shrugged. Just past 2 a.m. Hey, let me go get Professor Kukui. He's been waiting for you to wake up. She disappeared from the doorway and Ash looked at Pikachu, horrified. 2 a.m.? He's been staying up for me all night? Pikachu. He could have gone home, I'm fine. Pikachu gave him a look and didn't answer. It hopped back on the bed, yawning and stretching widely. Sighing, Ash sat next to it, tapping his foot nervously. Few minutes later, slightly rumpled and weary Professor Kukui came through the door. I heard you have been up and about, he smiled. How are you doing? Just fine, answered Ash. I feel much better. You shouldn't have waited up for me. Kukui gave him a weird look Ash didn't quite understand. Of course, I waited, he said. You gave me quite the scare earlier, but I'm glad you're better now. He pulled a chair near the bed and looked at Ash for a minute. The doctor gave you a cursory check while you were sleeping. He didn't find anything unusual, but he wants to do more tests in the morning. You did have a slight fever, so we could maybe measure it again now. Ash frowned and stared at the floor. That's not necessary, Professor. It wasn't me who was hurt, it was Greninja. I don't agree, but let's talk about that later. Speaking of which, I called Professor Sycamore's lab. Ash raised his head in surprise. He had forgotten he had told him to do that. What did he say? Had he heard anything about Lysandre? Kukui looked at him with serious eyes. There is something you need to know. Briefly, he summarized what had happened to Sycamore and what Alon had told him about Ash. Ash felt sick to his stomach. He stared at his balled-up hands. You gotta be wondering about Greninja and me, he said quietly. He could feel Kukui's eyes on him but couldn't make himself to look back. I don't really tell about it to people, not after Lysandre. The thing is, I don't really understand it myself. Sometimes, when we fight together or when we really want to, I can see what Greninja is seeing and we can share the most important thing that's on our mind. Like when I came to Alola, I was just so happy, and I really wanted to tell Greninja about it, so I did. Ash braved a look at the professor. He didn't say anything, just gave an encouraging nod for him to continue. I think it was almost half a year ago, when I was just about to leave Kalos. There was still something going on after the crisis and all, so Greninja needed to stay and protect the region. Greninja decided to stay in its evolved form because it's stronger that way. And that way we would always be connected. Ash paused and rubbed his eyes. It had always been so difficult to explain these things. So, it's been that long, and usually I don't even remember that we have this bond. Sometimes I would get these flashes, when it was fighting, but even that hasn't happened in many months. Until now. Last night, it tried to share something with me, but I was sleeping and it didn't work. That's why I was so tired. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. Ash looked up at Kukui. It's okay, Ash, was all the professor said. He had this strange, sad look in his eyes. Ash leaned on his hands and stared up at the ceiling. Greninja had been watching this place in Kalos. It probably knew something weird was going on in there. But it got in a fight and got caught. Lysandre caught it. Ash felt the familiar anxiety pressing on his chest and screwed his eyes shut for a moment. Lysandre heard it with this device. It was like Pikachu's Thunderbolt, but much worse. Then Greninja somehow pulled me in, and it was like I was out of my own body. It has never been like that before. But I think Greninja just really needed to show me what was happening to it. There was dawning realization in Kukui's eyes. That was when you fell unconscious during class. I guess. So, later, when you were having convulsions, Lysandre was hurting Greninja again? Ash looked at him in confusion. When I was having. Kukui nodded. I had just gotten you into this room and went to get a glass of water. When I came back, you were shaking. Like you were constricting every muscle in your body and struggling. I ran next to you, but that's when you went completely limp. 5 minutes later, as I was talking to Nurse Jill, you woke up. Ash hummed thoughtfully. Oh, I didn't know my body reacted to it like that. But yeah, Greninja tried to escape and Lysandre got mad, so he used the device a lot. I couldn't, it was too much for us, so the bond got broken and I fell unconscious. He ground his teeth together, brow set. And now I don't have any way to know if Greninja is okay. Pikachu hopped on his lap, murmuring softly. Ash shared a look with it, and then met Kukui's gaze. Professor Kukui, I gotta help Greninja. I'm going to Kalos. You have to let me go. Kukui's eyes widened. What? Wait a minute, Ash, Lysandre is dangerous. We don't even know what he is planning for this time. Ash kind of knew, but he felt like it would be best not to tell the professor about Lysandre's interest in him. Anyway, everyone would be safer if Ash went to Kalos by himself and didn't lead Lysandre and his goons to peaceful Alola. It's gonna be okay, Professor, Ash said, and Kukui looked at him like he was going mad. Ash cleared his parched throat. Hey, could I have some water? I dropped the glass you left me, sorry. It took few seconds for Kukui to shake himself out of his shock. He looked at the wet floor for another second and then jumped up. Of course, by the gods, you must be hungry as well. I had some soup prepared. It's just in the fridge next door. I'll go get it. Don't go anywhere. He rushed out of the room, and Ash turned to Pikachu. In the morning, right buddy? Let's leave at dawn. Kiave couldn't imagine who would call him at this hour. He slumped in front of his beeping computer and squinted at the screen. It was 4 a.m., so he strongly considered not answering. But then he looked closer at the caller. The call was coming from the Pokemon school. Suddenly very awake, he accepted the call. Ash and Pikachu's faces popped up on the monitor. He blinked. Ash. Hey, what's up? Alola, Kiave. Ash grinned like nothing was out of the ordinary. Sorry for calling this late. I need a favor. Kiave stared at the boy. What? Hold on, what is going on? Are you alright? I'm fine. Listen, I gotta travel to Kalos as soon as possible. I wondered if you could give me a lift to the airport with Charizard? For a moment, Kiave thought for sure he was still sleeping. Ash was making no sense. He brushed a hand through his hair. What do you mean, you have to travel to Kalos? What is going on? I can't ask Professor Kukui, he wouldn't let me leave, continued Ash, like Kiave hadn't spoken. He suddenly looked very serious, almost desperate. Please Kiave, it would be a big help. There is something I really need do. My friend is in big trouble. I gotta help it. Kiave swallowed. Ash was going behind Kukui's back. Traveling to Kalos of all places? And so soon after he had gotten sick? Kiave was ready to say no, but he also understood the burning need to help. And if it truly was something Ash needed to do, I will help you, he decided. Of course I will, Ash. When do you need to leave? Ash smiled widely. Thanks so much, I really owe you a big one. I already booked the flight. It leaves at 8. At 8? Kiave shouted. 8 in the morning. What, have you packed already? Ash looked around with wide eyes. Sorry, can you be a bit quieter? I had to sneak into the computer lab. Professor Kukui is sleeping just next door. Kiave shut his mouth but couldn't help his shocked expression. Ash raised his small backpack, so it showed on the screen. I already got everything I need. I just needed a way to get to the airport fast and quietly. So, will you help me? Sometimes, Kiave really couldn't understand what was going through Ash's head. Still, he nodded. Yes, I will help you. Let me just grab a few things and I will be there in an hour, right? Ash beamed. Sure. Thank you so much. They ended the call. Kiave rubbed his temples. There was still a small rational part in his brain that tried to tell him this was a colossally bad idea, but his fighter's brain was quickly taking over. Before he knew it, he had made his decision. Yeah, he had promised to take Ash to the airport, but he hadn't promised he would let Ash board the plane alone. He just needed to make a call. Pallet House, how can I help you? Kukui swallowed. Delia sounded really busy, her restaurant clearly in the middle of lunch hour. He cleared his throat. Hi Delia, it's Professor Kukui. He could hear the smile in her voice. Oh, Alola, Professor. I'm sorry to call you at work, but I couldn't reach you earlier and it's quite important. Do you have a moment now? Yes of course, just a second. He could hear Delia speaking to someone, probably putting them in charge temporarily. Then she was walking, and soon the background noise subsided, and he could hear a door closing. All right, what is it? Now that he actually had to talk about it, Kukui felt quite nervous. He very much did want to believe Ash's explanation about him and Greninja, but he just had to make sure. And either way, he did have the responsibility to tell Delia about his son's well-being. It's about Ash. Delia sighed. Of course. What did he do this time? Kukui was taken aback. Her first instinct wasn't to worry about her son, but to scold him. Hold on, he did nothing wrong. Kukui quickly said. He had a health issue. Instantly, Kukui wanted to slap himself. That had been a terrible way to start. A health issue? Ash, Delia was saying. Does he have any history of epilepsy or a similar condition? Kukui barreled on. Delia fell quiet for a moment. Epilepsy. Now he could hear the concern at the edges of her voice. What happened to him? Kukui quickly explained the main points of the previous day's incident. The absence, the loss of breath, the sudden spells of convulsing. He left out the part where Ash had attempted to crawl to Kalos on all fours, even though in Kukui's memory it had been one of the most upsetting things to witness. He woke up properly about an hour ago and seemed quite fine already. He ate a whole bowl of soup and went back to sleep. I still want to take him to the clinic for a proper checkup after he wakes up. Especially if this is something that has never happened before? Delia was silent throughout the explanation, and long after. Finally, she spoke. Ash has always been healthy, Professor. There was a pause, while Kukui waited for Delia to continue, but it didn't happen. Delia? He questioned kindly. Are you all right? Ash is a unique boy, she said finally, in an odd voice. Sometimes things happen to him that no one else understands. Are you sure this had nothing to do with a Pokemon? Kukui was glad he was not having a face call with her. His expression would have been a sight to see. What do you mean? He choked out. I'm sure he's fine, Delia said. Just let me know if it happens again. Or if something else happens to him. I really need to get back to my restaurant now. Thank you for calling. Wait, Delia. Kukui yelped, but she had already closed the call. Kukui stared at the silent phone. This had not gone how he had expected at all. Deep in thought, Kukui walked back through the silent hallways. He waved a hand at Nurse Jill, who was nearly asleep on her chair, and peeked into Ash's room. The kid was sprawled on the bed, sleeping peacefully, Pikachu on his stomach. Sometimes things happen to him that no one else understands. Kukui sighed. Maybe he was fine. Maybe Ash had an invisible connection to a Pokemon thousands of miles away on a different region and his body had just reacted to what happened to it. Maybe Ash just was unique. He shuffled into the teacher's break room, cleared a couch from extra pillows and fell limply on it. Whatever it was, thought Kukui and yawned widely, it could wait until the morning. 2 hours later, when he woke up and went to check on Ash, the boy was gone. Kiave had just landed on the schoolyard when he spotted Ash and Pikachu slipping through the side door. He waved and urged Charizard to walk towards them. Ash, noticing them approach, waved back and jogged the rest of the distance. Alola. He greeted with a grin. There was determined sort of energy in him, his eyes sharp and jaw set. Alola, Ash, Kiave said. Hop on, Ash did, and they soared up into the hazy early morning sky. They were quiet at first, deep in though and exhausted by the early hour. Then, Kiave saw Pikachu jump over his shoulder and walk up to Charizard's neck. It faced the horizon. ears down and legs bowed, like it was about to jump. Pika, Pikachu Pika, it said. Charizard turned briefly to look at it. Zard, Charizard, it answered. I wonder what they are talking about, said Kiave. He could hear Ash's soft laugh behind him. Pikachu's just getting hyped up. I woulda liked it if we didn't have to go back to Kalos anytime soon, but now that it's happening, I guess it's pretty exiting too. We had a great time in Kalos, even though the crisis kinda messed everything up. The crisis? Kiave couldn't help but ask. You were there? Yeah, Ash said in serious tone. Anyway, it's a long story. The thing is, there is still a lot of bad stuff going on in Kalos. My friend got in trouble while it was trying to help clear it all up, so now I gotta help it. You get why I couldn't tell Professor Kukui about leaving this soon, right? He would have probably locked you in the house and never let you out, said Kiave with a chuckle. The adrenaline from their secret trip was making him all giddy. He couldn't help the excited flame that surged through his chest when they started to descend towards the airport. When they had landed in front of the departure halls, Ash hopped off Charizard and looked up to Kiave. Thanks again, really. You know, you shouldn't tell Professor Kukui that you helped me. Just say you knew nothing about this. Kiave jumped off too, and Ash took a step back in surprise. Actually, I don't have to tell him anything, Kiave said, and Ash stared at him. Because I'm coming with you. What? Shouted Ash. No, you're not. No way. Come on, you really think we would let you go all alone? Came a third voice, and Ash twirled around, heart in his throat. Behind him stood Lana, with a full backpack at her feet and sleepy Poplio in her arms. Lana. He yelped. What are you doing here? Lana smiled playfully. Coming with you to Kalos. Kiave called me and told me you were about to do something really stupid. I figured since Dad's back for now, I don't have any responsibilities at home, so I might as well join you. We already bought the tickets, so, you know, there's not really much you can do to stop us, said Kiave. He reached up and collected his bag he had stored behind Charizard's saddle. Thanking it, he returned Charizard into its ball. Ash was whipping his head between them, bewildered. Guys, his voice was full of emotion. He turned to Pikachu, who was sitting on his shoulder. What do you think, buddy? Let's go save Greninja with Kiave and Lana, huh? Pikachu. Ash and Pikachu turned back to their friends with identical grins on their faces. Ash pumped his fist. All right, let's do this then. Thank you so much, guys. No problem, said Kiave solemnly. Yeah, no problem at all, agreed Lana. That's what friends are for, right? Ash smiled widely at her but soon got a bit more serious. You don't really know what you're getting into. It's gonna be pretty dangerous. Lana picked up her bag and hefted it on her shoulder. Yeah, you can tell us more about it when we are in the air. We should get going. She's right, let's not miss our plane, said Kiave, grinning at Ash over his shoulder. Ash stared after them for a moment. Then, he shrugged and ran to catch up with his friends. Have you been here all night? Kukui startled so badly he accidentally kicked the table in front of him. Cursing, he sat up. He realized then that he had been dozing off on his chair in the computer lab, his body just so overwhelmed with stress that, at some point, it had shut down. Kukui rubbed at his eyes until he saw spots and turned towards the voice. He found Principal Oak standing there in the doorway, staring him down. Morning light was already filtering through the hallway windows behind him. Huh? He mumbled intelligently. Oh, Samson, yeah. Samson stepped closer. What are you doing? Have you slept at all? Kukui moved on to massage his temples. Yeah, I slept for 2 hours and that was enough. You know, for me to lose Ash. Lose Ash? Oak parroted. Lose him where? Kukui snorted. If I knew where he was, I wouldn't have lost him, now would I? Samson stared at him. Kukui bowed his head. I'm sorry. I'm in a terrible mood. He took a deep breath and tried to center himself. He felt strange, his head stuffy and body stiff and sore. It was about 3 a.m. Ash was finally sleeping peacefully. Well, that's what I thought. So I went to call his mother and after that, I went to have a nap. But when I woke up, he was gone. So, I have now spent about, he checked the time. It was 7:30. 2.5 hours just running around here, and calling everyone, from my students' homes, to Ash Mother. Again. To Rotom Dex at home, to the Pokemon Center, nothing, he is just gone. Samson set a heavy hand on his shoulder. Hey, slow down. You are making no sense. Kukui, did anyone have any idea where you might be? Defeated, Kukui shook his head. I pretty much just woke them up and made everyone upset. All his mother said is that this happens sometimes. What does that even mean? Her son just goes missing sometimes. He sighed and leaned his head on his hands. This is the longest day of my life. I'm just so exhausted. And I fear Ash has gone and done something very reckless. And that was when Mallow, sweaty and out of breath like she had been running for her dear life, leaned through the doorway. Professors, she panted. I just got a text from Lana. She's at the airport with Kiave and Ash. The plane leaves in 15 minutes. They're on their way to Kalos. Lysandre was fuming. The kid's Greninja had fallen into some sort of meditative state and was no longer responding to threats nor pain. It had evolved back into its normal state after Lysandre had begun with the shock collar. He did have to admit, though only quietly and to himself alone, that he had probably gone a bit overboard with it, but he had just been so angry. But whatever the reason had been, it was now just a normal Greninja and unresponsive of a one. It had given away nothing. So Lysandre was still in square one with locating Ash Ketchum. The thing from his wildest dreams had walked straight into his lap but had given him nothing but a pounding headache. Still, the fact that it had evolved meant that Ash must now be aware that something had happened to it, right? Wasn't one of the things about the bond phenomenon that the trainer feels the same pain their Pokemon does? If that was true, then Ash must have been alerted to the trouble. But did it happen if they were in different regions? Possibly hundreds or thousands of miles away from each other? Lysandre had read through Professor Sycamore's notes at least half a dozen times by now. They weren't that extensive, and mostly focused on Ash and his Greninja while in combat. And even then, most of it was clear bullshit. Maximum trust? Pokemon and trainers' hearts being one? Right. There were the other notes too. The notes of Alva, the previous Mega Evolution Counselor of the Azoth Kingdom. His years of hard work and study had produced the Mega Wave Jewel, which he had used to force Mega Evolution on his Pokemon. About half a year ago he had been arrested when his mission to gain control of the Azoth Kingdom had failed, but luckily Lysandre's henchmen had found his research before the police had. The jewel was now destroyed, but there was one thing Alva's research notes had made Lysandre sure of. If Mega Evolution could be forced, so could Bond Evolution. And Lysandre was going to find out just how it was done. Lana woke up as the plane had finally begun its descent. She rubbed at her eyes and looked around. Next to her, Ash was still deep asleep with Pikachu curled up tightly on his lap. Next to him, on the aisle seat, Kiave was studying the map of Kalos. Hey, she said in a low voice. Kiave raised his head and smiled slightly at her. You ready for this? I think so, answered Kiave. He frowned. Though what Ash told us about Lysandre and Team Flare, that sounded way more intense than what I saw on the foreign news. Lana agreed, though she was pretty sure Ash had told them barely anything. At some points, it had been clear he was skipping over some major events. Either way, she knew she was in for something big and probably very dangerous. But she refused to regret her decision to help her friend. I just cannot wait to see Ash Greninja, she said, excitement bubbling inside. That sounded so cool. I know, right? Agreed Kiave. I will never understand how Ash could leave a Pokemon like that behind. Pikachu's ears twitched, and it raised its head. It looked up at Lana and smiled. Hey, Pikachu, she said, we are almost there. Pika. It chirped. Then, it crawled up Ash's arm, all the way up onto his head. Ash's whole upper body bent down by its weight, until his head touched the seat in front of him. That was when he woke up. Huh? He croaked sleepily and sat up. He ran a hand through his hair and hit Pikachu, who yelped and hopped back on his shoulder. We there yet? Kiave watched the two with fond amusement. Yeah, almost, he said. Poplio jumped up on Lana's lap and leaned in to watch through the window. Poplio, it said with excitement. They had descended under the thick clouds and could finally see Kalos stretching under them. Lana peeked through the window as well, and saw what could only be Lumio's city, the biggest city in the Kalos region. After Lola and their sweet and quiet Mele Mele Island, it seemed huge and imposing in front of her. "You sure about this?" she asked when they all stood in front of a phone booth in the airport lobby. "You know what you're gonna say?" Ash nodded. "Let's just do this." It took only 2 seconds for Professor Kukui to answer. "Hello?" "Alola, Professor, guys," they all greeted, as they saw the whole rest of the class crowding behind Kukui. There was a moment of chaos when everyone was talking at the same time, until Kukui raised his hands and silenced the others. He looked exhausted, but he smiled nonetheless when he saw they were all doing well. "Thank you for calling. Ash, when you come back, you were grounded for a month." "Ash, how could you leave me behind?" wailed Rotom Dex from the back of the crowd. Ash had the decency to look embarrassed. "I'm sorry for sneaking off, Professor Rotom, but I really gotta do this." "I know," Kukui sighed. "And you are free to travel as you please. You are a registered trainer. Doesn't change the fact you almost gave me a heart attack when you suddenly disappeared. Also, are you sure you're completely okay now?" Ash nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine." Kukui looked at Kiave and Lana. "To you two I can only say I'm really worried, and I wish you wouldn't have left. Rest of it you are going to have to hear from your parents." Lana and Kiave shared a look. "Yup, we know," Lana said. "We already called them from the plane." "They were loud phone calls, but we did eventually get them to understand why we are doing this," added Kiave. "And I'm not backing down. Even if it might be dangerous, I just couldn't let Ash do it all alone." "That's what I thought, too," Lana said. Ash turned to look at them with a wide smile. "Thanks, guys. I would have loved to come, but I just have too many responsibilities at the restaurant," Mallow piped up from behind Kukui. "My mom and dad would never have let me leave," sighed Sophocles. "I would have been no help in a situation like that," mumbled Lily, wringing her hands. "I would have just been on the way." "That's not true, Lily," exclaimed Ash. Kiave smiled at their friends. "We understand why you all couldn't come. You don't need to worry. We will be okay." "Oh, to help with that, I made some calls myself. Got you some extra help," said Professor Kukui. "They should be there at the airport by now. Probably waiting just outside the front doors." Ash leaned in, eyes wide. "What? Who's there?" Kukui smiled. "I think you will have to find that out yourselves. But before you go." One by one, he gave all three a very serious, long look. "Please, stay safe. Call me every day, if you can. I want to know everything that happens. If anything goes wrong, and you need help, just tell me and I will be on my way as soon as I can." He paused and made sure they all understood. Then, he looked at Ash, and Ash, "Call you mother." Ash groaned but agreed to do that. They all solemnly promised to stay safe. After they had shared their see you soons with the rest of the class as well, they ended the call. It was an odd feeling. They were in Kalos, and they were going to face down a notorious criminal and save a friend. It was like something from a movie, thought Lana. But it was real. Thinking about it, the reality of it, she could feel the anxiety bubbling in her chest. "Let's go then, right guys?" cheered Ash, and pointed towards the front doorway of the airport hall. He seemed excited above all, no traces of nervousness to be seen. Pikachu jumped from his shoulder, hopping ahead full of bouncing energy. "Yeah, all right," agreed Kiave, slightly less sure. "Let's go." "Come on, Poplio," said Lana to the Pokémon at her feet, and together, they left the safety of the airport, stepping into the chilly and cloudy Kalos morning. They could instantly hear someone shouting, "Hey, Ash, over here." They turned around and Lana saw 3 people running towards them. The 2 girls reached them first. "Ash," they squealed and rushed to hug him. Ash seemed confused at first but hugged them back. When they broke apart, he was smiling from ear to ear. "Serena, Bonnie. Hey guys." The older boy finally reached them and put a hand on Ash's shoulder. "It's so nice to see you again." "You too, Clement," Ash grinned. "Wait, did Professor Kukui call you?" "He called Alon, who contacted us," explained the older girl, who Lana assumed was Serena. "He probably wanted Alon to contact the local officer Jenny too, but Alon thought it would just be easier, and faster, if we tried first by ourselves without getting the authorities involved." "Yeah, and call them on the scene later, when Greninja's safely out," said Clement. That's good, Ash said. Oh man, I'm so happy to see you. How are you guys? Lana exchanged a look with Kiave. They were standing back, watching the meetup of old friends. It was clear these four had a history, and even with what little Ash had told them about his journey to the Kalos conference and the crisis after, Lana could tell they had seen each other through some tough times. Still, she couldn't help but wonder about the little girl that was coming with them. She couldn't be old enough to even have her own Pokémon, could she? Like reading her thoughts, the girl, Bonnie, had walked around the other three and up to Lana and Kiave. Hey, she said. You must be Ash's friends from the Pokémon school, right? From Alola? Oh yeah, Kiave said with a little wave. My name is Kiave, and this is Lana. Nice to meet you, smiled Bonnie. From her bag at her hip, a tiny head popped up. Deneen. Bonnie giggled. Dedenne also says hi, Poplio. Wow, what Pokémon is that? Exclaimed Bonnie, and crouched down to stare at Poplio. Dedenne jumped out of her bag and ran up to play with Poplio. Is Dedenne yours? Asked Lana. Are you 10 already? No, she's 8, said Clemont, who had appeared beside them. Dedenne is technically mine, even though I let Bonnie take care of it. I'm almost 9, grumbled Bonnie. Yeah, Clemont is Bonnie's brother, Ash said. Then he rubbed his neck in embarrassment. Sorry, I forgot to introduce you all. Serena, Bonnie, Clemont, meet Lana and Kiave. They're my friends from Mele Island. They all greeted each other. Ash continued. Clemont is the Lumiose City gym leader and an inventor. Serena is a Pokémon performer and a great cook. And Bonnie is gonna be an amazing trainer when she's old enough. She already trained Zygarde. Serena blushed, and Bonnie grinned widely. Squishy is not here right now, though. It had to go somewhere important. Zygarde? Said Kiave slowly. I know it appeared during the crisis. It's yours? It's my friend, said Bonnie nodding. It hangs out with me sometimes when things are good. Kiave rubbed at his ear like he thought he had heard wrong. Wait, Zygarde hangs out with you. Well, just one of the cores, said Clemont, like that would make it any less impressive. Anyway, shouldn't we get going? Do you know which way we are heading, Ash? Everyone turned to look at Ash. He stared back at them blankly. No, he said then. I mean, I just know Greninja is somewhere here in Kalos. What? Spoke Lana, as everyone else was speechless. Kalos is huge. How do you expect us to find it? Ash didn't look too worried. He started jogging down the street but turned around to look at them. I thought we would just walk around a bit. I'm sure we will eventually find it. Lana and Kiave stared after him. Serena sighed, and Bonnie leaned down to pick Dedenne back up into her bag. Just go with it, Clemont said to them in low voice. Ash has this way of finding trouble. I'm sure before we know it, we've... Hey, I know those guys. They heard Ash shout. Somehow, he and Pikachu had already gotten quite far away. Before they had any time to react, the two had sprinted across the road and were quickly disappearing into the crowd. There he goes, stated Bonnie. Ash, wait, yelped Serena, and dashed after him. Oh no, said Lana, and then the rest of them were running too. Those had been the grunts with a Drapion and a Houndoom. Ash was sure of it. They had the same gray outfits than what he had seen Greninja's capturers dressed in. They were also wearing those kinds of ridiculous sunglasses not unlike what Team Flare had worn. Ash sprinted around a corner, Pikachu at his heels. He couldn't let those guys get away. Another corner, and he came to a full stop. The goons were just there, in the quiet backyard of an old building, loading some supplies into their van. Stop right there, demanded Ash. When they spotted Ash, they paused and stared. That's the kid, the other said. They looked at each other, and then back at Ash. We need to tell the boss, said the other. Let's get moving. Pikachu, yelled Ash. Use Iron Tail on the tires. As Pikachu was charging, one of the goons threw his Pokeball. Pangoro, he ordered, as a Pangoro appeared from its ball. Body Slam. Pikachu's Iron Tail hit the other Pokemon at a weird angle with little effect, and Pangoro's Body Slam sent it flying backwards. Pikachu, shouted Ash, but Pikachu landed well and confirmed it was okay. Let's go, snapped the other grunt, as she slammed the van's back doors closed and ran for the driver's seat. Yeah, Start the car. Pangoro, use slash, dodge at Pikachu and use quick attack. Pikachu easily ran past the larger Pokemon's arms and tackled it straight in the face. The Pangoro staggered back, but held strong. Slash, again. Pikachu, use Thunderbolt. The engine started, and the car roared to life. Come on, hurry, called the woman from the driver's seat. The grunt returned his Pangoro, and Pikachu's Thunderbolt scorched the pavement where it had stood. The man ran to the passenger seat and they accelerated. Oh no, you don't, yelled Ash and sprinted to the van. He grabbed the back panel and held on as the car shot towards the yard exit. Pikapi. The car turned a hard left and Ash lost his grip. He was thrown down on the pavement, rolling around until landing in a heap. Dazed, he sat up, head spinning. Pikachu dashed to him. Pikapi, it repeated, worried. Ash wasn't done. Roll it. He barked and threw the Pokeball. Roll it shot out with a determined screech. Follow that van. Roll it. Only when it had disappeared from his view, Ash slumped back on his hands. Oh man. He looked at Pikachu. I really hope Rollit can keep up with the car. Now those guys know we are here. We need to find them, before they find us. Pika. There was a shout from the edge of the yard. Ash. Ash and Pikachu turned and saw Kiave, Serena, Lana and Bonnie running towards them. Few paces behind them came Clemont, gasping for breath. Ash realized he was still sitting on the ground, clothes rumpled and elbows scratched, as Serena kneeled next to him with a worried frown. Are you okay? She asked. What happened? Who did you see? Asked Lana. I'm fine, stated Ash, and forced himself to stand up. He felt somewhat dizzy still but masked it by leaning down and brushing off some of the dust and pebbles from his clothes. I saw two of Lysandre's grunts, but they got away. Pika Pipica. Yeah, I sent Rollit after their car. Maybe it can find out where they're heading. Good thinking, said Kiave, as Bonnie asked, Rollit? Rollit is Ash's Pokemon from Alola. It's grass and flying type, so it can hopefully follow the car from air, explained Lana. So cool, gasped Bonnie. I want to meet it. Do you have any other new Pokemon, Ash? Ash grinned despite himself. Yeah, you wanna see? Before the two got too excited, Serena interjected. Hey, maybe later, right? It's about lunchtime and you three must be hungry. Also, Ash, you're still bleeding. She's right, agreed Kiave. We should get something to eat and think up a plan. We could spend today here in Lumiose City and prepare, suggested Clemont. We can stay at our home. Dad's away so we have an extra bed free if we decide to also spend the night here. Yeah, I guess I'm pretty hungry, Ash admitted, rubbing his stomach. Now that the earlier adrenaline was rapidly leaving his body, he was starting to feel faint and tired. There was no way he was going to get anything done before a good meal and a rest. Same for me, nodded Lana. We left really early in the morning and I'm exhausted. And we haven't eaten anything in almost 6 hours. Yay, let's go have lunch, Bonnie cheered, and after that I want to meet all of your Pokemon. Ash looked down the path where Rollit had flown off to. He really hoped it would be okay. Pikachu climbed on his shoulder and nuzzled his neck, giving him wordless encouragement. Yeah, let's go, he decided. Clemont smiled and instructed everyone to follow him. All right everybody, come on out, you two, guys. Ash and Kiave threw their Pokeballs and out came Litten, Lycanroc, Turtonator and Marowak. Charizard, Kiave explained, was a bit too large to come out indoors. Wow, squealed Bonnie. So many Pokemon. Serena and Clemont dug out their Pokeballs too. Come out and meet everybody. Clement's Bunnelby, Chespin and Luxray, and Serena's Braixen, Pancham and Sylveon all joined the other Pokemon. Oh, cool, marveled Lana. She set Poplio on the living room floor. Go and have fun with all the others, she encouraged it. You can play more with them later, Bonnie, said Clemont to his overly excited sister. Let's eat lunch first, right? We have some spaghetti in the fridge. Awesome, said Ash, slumping down on the sofa. Man, am I hungry. I can help you prepare the food, offered Kiave to Clemont, and the two boys disappeared into the kitchen, Lana wandering after them. Serena dug out a smaller bag from her backpack and walked up to Ash. Can I take a look at your arms? Ash glanced down and saw that his elbows were covered in dried blood. Sure, he shrugged. He had already forgotten about the scratches, but he didn't want to accidentally stain Clement and Bonnie's couch. Serena sat next to him and began wiping them clean. "How have you been?" she asked quietly. "Really? I've been great," said Ash with a smile. "Alola is amazing. It's been so relaxing there." "That's really good to hear," she said honestly. "I had a great time in Hoenn, too. I learned a lot about myself there. Next time, when it's time to compete, I will be ready for the master class." "Yeah," exclaimed Ash, pumping his fist. "I'm sure you will win this time, Serena." "Stay still," she chided, and grabbed his arm to keep it in place. She placed a band-aid on the damaged skin and then paused. She didn't raise her head. "What it is, Serena?" Serena twisted his arm around. "What's this bracelet for?" she questioned. Ash's smile brightened. "Oh yeah, it's for Z moves." "Z moves?" came Bonnie's voice. She had sneaked up to them and was now leaning over, staring at the Z ring. "You won't believe it," grinned Ash. "They're so cool." Clement leaned his head out from the kitchen. "Hey, guys, come to eat already." They got to know each other a bit more during the meal. Ash, Kiave and Lana explained the Z moves to the others, and Serena told them about Pokemon performances. Clement told them about what it was like to be a gym leader, and how he had a self-made robot taking care of the place even at that moment. Bonnie had endless questions about Alolan Pokemon. Stomachs finally full, they resettled on the living room couches and Bonnie plonked down on the floor to play with their Pokemon. Ash was instantly ready to doze off as he slumped on the soft couch. "Yeah, Inferno Overdrive," Kiave was explaining. "That's the Z move I can do with Turtonator. It's so powerful. It really feels like I'm getting the strength from the Wella volcano." Ash was nearly asleep when he heard Clement ask, "What Z moves can you do, Ash?" "Huh?" He mumbled and sat up straighter. "Oh, with Pikachu I can do Gigavolt Havoc and Breakneck Blitz. Litten, Lycanroc and Rowlet know that 1-2 and Rowlet can also do Bloom Doom. Oh, and Lycanroc knows Continental Crush." "Yeah, Ash already has 4 Z crystals," explained Lana, as the others did a double take. "I have the Waterium Z, so me and Poplio can perform the move Hydro Vortex." "I see," said Clement as he tugged at his hair in amazement. "Z moves sound really cool. I hope you can show them to us someday." "I'm sure we will," Kiave promised. "Hey, can any of you Mega Evolve you Pokemon? That is one of the things I really want to witness while here in Kalos." That was the last thing Ash heard before he fell asleep. He had no idea how long it had been when Serena gently shook him awake. "Hey, you can go sleep in Clement's room," she said with a gentle smile. "We will just clean up here and then I think Lana and Kiave are off to have a nap too." Ash was way too tired to argue, so he just nodded and climbed the stairs up to Clement's room. Pikachu, equally exhausted, followed him. Ash barely had the sense to drop his backpack on the floor before falling face first on the covers. He was deep asleep just seconds later. Lysandre entered the testing lab and looked around. He spotted his leading scientist, Mabel, leaning over her laptop with a frustrated scowl. He walked up to her and studied her research notes over her shoulder. "Any progress?" he asked. Mabel angrily pushed the laptop away and leaned her hands on the table. "Nothing," she answered shortly. "None of our test subjects have shown any response markers of bond evolution. We tried everything. That new intern, Hefe, he even actually bonded with that one Greninja he caught few weeks ago. He's been training with it every day and being all best buddies with it, but it won't evolve further. The energy pulse we developed and built for months, it just does nothing." Lysandre ground his teeth together. He was starting to get really impatient with his team, and the new Mega Wave Jewel. Mabel clenched her hand into fists. "There are still problems with the power output. Alva's notes are incomplete. We think some of the pages got left behind during the raid." "Then figure it out yourselves," roared Lysandre. "Are you scientists or not? This was supposed to be done weeks ago." It took a lot of effort from Mabel to not flinch. She nodded instead, pulling the laptop back to her and clicking open the Mega Wave Jewel data. "I'm on it, sir," she quickly said. Lysandre turned away from her and paced through the lab. All the other scientists hunched over their work, avoiding eye contact. Lysandre stepped into the hallway and slammed the lab door closed behind him. He only had time to stand there and fume for a second before one of his subordinates came sprinting down the corridor. The man stopped in front of him, breathing hard. Lysandre stared him down until he recovered enough to stand up straight again. "Sir," he began, frantic. "As you know, I was in Lumiose City with Celosia this morning. We saw the kid, you know, Ash. He was just there, he even attacked us with his Pikachu." Lysandre blinked, slowly drawing up to his full height. "You saw him where, exactly? What was he doing? Who was he with?" The man shrugged. "Near the warehouse where we get supplies, you know? I think he followed us. He appeared out of nowhere. And he was alone, you know, except for that Pikachu he always has with him." Lysandre hummed. His mind was already leaving the conversation to think up a new plan. He turned away and began walking towards his office. "Good job," he said over his shoulder. He grinned. It was time to start the preparations. This time, it was not Pikachu who woke Ash up. He stared up at the unfamiliar ceiling, wondering why his heart was beating faster than usual. A nightmare? He didn't think so. Something had woken him up just then. Ash sat up and looked around the room. It was brightly lit with daylight, and he was quickly reminded by the furnishing and the pieces of machinery all over the place that he was in Clement's room. Next to him, Pikachu woke up and looked around equally confused until it, too, remembered. "I think I heard something," Ash said in a low voice. He stood up, picking up his backpack and rolling his stiff shoulders. "Pika?" questioned Pikachu, but it got up too and jumped on his shoulder. Ash shared a look with it. "Let's go check outside," he said. He quietly descended the stairs and headed for the front door, stepping outside. The weather had warmed considerably from the morning, and Ash instantly felt better with the sunlight on his face. "Where are you going?" came a voice behind him. "Are you trying to sneak off?" Ash turned around and saw Bonnie standing there at the doorway, hands on her hips. Ash frowned. "No, I'm not sneaking off." He glanced around. "I just woke up and thought I heard something from outside. You want to help me look?" Bonnie's expression brightened. "Yeah." She ran up to him and twirled around, checking the surroundings. "Wait, what are we looking for?" "I'm not sure." They walked down the street until they came to the plaza next to the Prism Tower. Ash leaned back to look up to the tower, but out of nowhere, the sight made his stomach drop and he had to quickly turn his head away. He felt faintly ill. "Pikapi? I'm fine," Ash mumbled, leaning his hands on his knees and breathing deeply. After a minute, he straightened his back and found Bonnie looking at him with concern. "You okay?" she asked. She glanced at the Prism Tower and then back at Ash. Ash nodded. "Yeah, he braved a look back at the tower. There, at the bottom of it, he saw a tourist stall selling books like The Kalos Crisis. What really happened?" With a shudder, Ash turned back to Bonnie. "I guess I kinda forgot all of it took place right here." Bonnie smiled slightly. "I know, right? So much has happened here. And not just the crisis. I still remember when you climbed the tower and saved Garchomp. I was so scared for you too. It's funny to think we barely even knew each other back then." The change of topic was a relief and Ash grinned. "Right? That was a great day. I'm really glad I was able to help Garchomp. And Clement's gym is awesome." He gazed up at the tower, spotting the ledge where he and Alon had faced Lysandre. "It's kinda strange now. The tower looks the same as it did before, but I just got this weird feeling." Bonnie shrugged thoughtfully. "Yeah, it has been weird. After we came back from the Azoth Kingdom and you and Serena left, everything here was almost back to normal. But I still felt like the place was different somehow. Something has changed, and I don't think I will ever love the city as much as I used to." "I get it. It's such a beautiful city, but everything here reminds me of. The thing is, when I left Kalos, I was sure I would never have to think about Lysandre again," said Ash quietly. Bonnie had this piercing look in her eyes when she looked up at him. "You know, you never really told us what happened when you were up in the tower with Alon and Lysandre." Ash glanced at her with wide eyes. "I didn't?" he asked nervously. He was so glad when the distraction came. It came in the form of Rowlet, swooping down from the sky and screeching in excitement. "Rowlet!" Ash yelled, and Pikachu only just had the time to jump away before the little owl crashed into his chest, sending them both on the ground. Ash laughed and hugged it tightly, before grabbing it with one arm and using the other to push himself back up. "Wow, so that's a Rowlet," squealed Bonnie, crowding in to have a look at it. "So cute." Rowlet was babbling and flapping its wings frantically. "You were looking for me?" asked Ash. "Though I heard your voice, you must have flown past Clemont and Bonnie's house." Rowlet struggled free from his arms and flew few meters into the air. "Rowlet, row. You found which way they were going?" Rowlet flew an anxious circle in the air and pointed somewhere towards southeast. Ash and Bonnie shared a look and sprinted back to the house. Clemont was standing anxiously at the front door when he spotted Ash, Bonnie and Pikachu running towards him. They looked fine, if only a bit ruffled, and Ash had a small round Pokémon in his arms. "Where have you been?" he demanded, when they reached the porch. "Team Flare, I mean Lysandre and his new goons. They could be anywhere. You disappeared, and I was getting worried." "Sorry, big bro," chirped Bonnie, as Ash pushed past him with a determined pace, Pikachu at his heels. "Don't worry, we were just there," he was saying distractedly. "Anyway, where are Lana and Kiave? We should get going." Clemont spun around on his heels. "Wait, what? We are leaving now." Ash was already gone. "Do you have a tent we could borrow?" he called from the living room. "We probably need to spend few nights in the forest." "Ash's Rowlet came back," explained Bonnie, when Clemont had stared into space for long enough. "It can show us the right direction." She started climbing the stairs to go up to her room. Clemont ran after her. "Wait, Bonnie, don't you think this is a bit too fast?" he questioned nervously. "Ash only slept for few hours and we didn't even make any plans yet. We can't just rush into a situation like this one. It's too dangerous." Bonnie stopped in the middle of the stairs and turned to stare him in the eye, hands on her hips. Even standing a few steps above him, she was still slightly shorter, but no less imposing. "Listen, big bro. We have traveled before. We have faced Lysandre before. Also, we beat that Alvin guy, or whatever his name was, who had the Mega Evolution machine. We know barely anything about Ash's past, but I know for sure that what we have seen is nothing compared to him." She cocked her head to the side, looking years older than she was. Clemont felt incredibly proud and incredibly terrified at the same time. If Ash is leaving now, you know there's no stopping him. You just gotta choose if you are gonna follow him. Clemont worried his lip for a moment longer, until he came to decision. He nodded with new determination. "You're right, Bonnie. Of course I'm going to follow. I think I just got scared for a minute." Bonnie smiled gently. "I know, and it's okay. I'm scared too, you know? But more than that, I want to help Ash and Greninja. That's what's important, and that's why I'm not gonna hesitate." Clemont could only nod, speechless. "Come on, let's go pack, right?" said Bonnie, and together, they climbed the rest of the way up. 45 minutes later, the group arrived at the front door of Sycamore's lab. Pikachu perched on his shoulder. Ash pushed the door open, and they stepped into the quiet and chilly front hall. "Alon?" called Ash, and Pikachu let out a similar sound. "Are you here?" Serena joined them. "Alon, it's us." After a minute, they could hear hurried steps from upstairs. Then, Alon appeared at the top of the stairs. Serena had seen him briefly when he had called her to meet Ash at the airport, but he looked even more worn out in real life. He had a scruffy beginning of a beard and tired eyes, but he broke into an honest smile when he saw who they were. "Ash," he called and descended the stairs quickly. "Clemont, Bonnie, Serena, great to see you." "Good to see you too," they said back. Ash stepped to the side and waved a hand towards his Alolan friends. "These are Lana and Kiave. They're from the Alola region." "Nice to meet you too," said Alon politely. "Nice to meet you," said Kiave. "Yeah, nice to meet you," nodded Lana. She looked around into the silent and dark hallways. "You are here all alone?" "Yes, for now," said Alon. "Lysandre's men, they trashed the place. Most of the equipment in the lab is ruined. I had to send the lab assistants onto leave until I figure out how to get everything back up. Most of my time currently is spent with paperwork and looking after the Pokémon living on the compound." "Wow, sorry to hear it," gasped Serena. "It must be hard taking care of everything by yourself." "Is Professor Sycamore still unwell?" asked Ash in a tight voice. Alon nodded with a frown. I didn't tell Professor Kukui all the details, but during the raid, Sycamore got stabbed in the stomach. He's feeling better now, but things were critical for a long time. He won't be able to work for a long time still. And I really don't want him to. That's terrible, Clement exclaimed, setting his hand on Bonnie's shoulder almost like on instinct. We have to get those goons to pay for that. Yeah, and you will, agreed Alon. He turned to Ash. Ash, I know why you are doing this, and I approve it. I would come with you if I had any options. But as it is, you really must be careful. They stole all the research about your bond evolution, and everything about Mega Evolution that they could get their hands on. They're planning something big. I get it, Ash said. We will be careful. I don't think you actually do understand, insisted Alon. There have been reports all over Kalos about Pokemon hunters, way more than ever before. Recently, a couple of wild Greninja approached the southern police station asking for help, because so many from their group had gone missing. Wild Greninja? That just doesn't happen. And now your Greninja has been taken. Lysandre tortured it so badly your bond connection broke. He has all the research about something only you, specifically, can do. I know you remember what he said to you in the tower. What he tried to do even then. Ash, it's bad. I just need you to think about this carefully, and not do anything rash. Ash's eyes were razor sharp as he stared up at Alon. I get it, he said again, and Serena got the urge to take a step back. This was a side of Ash that rarely was shown, and it was always a shock. Sometimes, he let it slip that here was something deeper in the goofy kid appearance than what he chose to show to the world. You know I know what's at stake, Ash was saying to Alon. I really do, but I also know what I gotta do. I'm not scared of Lysandre. He can do whatever he wants, but I'm not leaving Greninja in his hands. I will be careful, I promise, but you know there is nothing I wouldn't do to save it. I know, Ash, said Alon quietly, and that's what I'm afraid of. We will do everything we can to help. Kiave stepped in, breaking the tension slightly. Ash won't be alone. He's got all of us. Yeah, cheered Bonnie. We are in this together. Alon looked at Ash for a moment longer, worry evident in his expression, until he sighed and rolled his shoulders, looking at the group as a whole. All right, come with me, he said. I have some extra supplies for you. With varying degrees of enthusiasm, the group followed him deeper into the lab. So, what did you say about the Greninja? Asked Ash, when he and Alon were the only ones left in the storage room, the others having already migrated into the kitchen. Alon raised his eyebrows. Those near the South Station? Ash nodded. Yeah, those who asked for Officer Jenny's help. What's happening to all the Greninja? We don't know, said Alon with a frown. My theory is that Lysandre and his team are behind it. For some reason, they're collecting Greninja. Maybe that's why he took your Greninja, too. He couldn't have known that it stayed behind when you left Kalos. It was probably just a happy accident for Lysandre. Ash was quiet for a while. I think Greninja went looking for Lysandre, he said then. His gaze was down, shoulders tight. It knew something was still going on, even though everyone else stopped searching for him. That day, before it got caught, it tried to tell me something. It must have known it had found Lysandre. I'm sorry, Ash, said Alon, and Ash finally looked up at him, his eyes steely. I know you must be really worried. What I said earlier, don't get me wrong. I know you are taking this seriously, I do. But this is different than what Lysandre was planning before. This is personal. Against you. I just needed to know that you understand that. Yeah, I know, Ash said easily. Thanks for worrying, but I will be okay. Alon admired his optimism, but it didn't really do anything to settle the uneasy feeling he was having about the whole thing. But he supposed there probably wasn't much else he could do to prevent Ash from charging headfirst into a trap. They were picking up the last supplies from the room when Serena peeked her head through the doorway. Oh, here you are. Come eat, we made snacks. It was already late afternoon when they finally reached the southeast edge of the Lumiose city. Ahead of them a gravel road stretched into the far forest, and beyond that, the peaks of mountains could be seen. It really hit Serena then. They were actually doing this. She was traveling with Ash again, and this time, they were heading into danger purposefully. Yeah, they had faced danger before, and it had always been fine in the end, but she had to admit she felt nervous. Excited about the adventure, sure, about her old and new friends. But what Alon had said to Ash back there, she hadn't known about even half of it. Sycamore's condition? Greninja getting tortured? And for the millionth time since that day, she wondered what had happened in the tower. She was starting to realize about just how many things Ash was keeping them in the dark of. "Come out, Rowlet," called Ash. He was few paces ahead of them, facing the distance. The Alolan Owl Pokémon shot out and flew into the air with an excited spin. "It was this way, right?" Ash asked, and the Pokémon nodded. Ash grinned. "Great job. You can fly with us if you want to, but if you're tired I can put you back in the ball, right?" Rowlet flew around him and sat on top of his fully packed backpack. It looked down at it with confusion. "Yeah, I'm sorry Rowlet, but I don't have any space for you in there," Ash laughed. "The holiday is over for now. Kalos is way different than Alola. You will see." Rowlet spun its head in obvious puzzlement. Serena wanted to giggle about how cute it was. It really was such an Ash Pokémon. Rowlet, it chirped eventually, and hopped on Ash's head. There, it sighed happily and closed its eyes. Still smiling, Ash shrugged with amusement. With the snoozing bird on his head and Pikachu settled on his shoulder, he turned to the rest of the group. "Let's go then, right guys?" He was quite the comical sight, and Serena couldn't help her grin. "Yeah, let's go," she agreed. The excitement was starting to take over, leaving the nervousness and doubt in its shadow. "I'm ready," said Lana. She had the Poplio in her arms, and it let out a similar agreement. "Yup, I'm ready too," stated Bonnie, and Clemont added a quieter, "Yeah, me too." Deneen. "Come on then," Kiave grinned and started jogging down the path. The others followed suit, except Clemont, who looked after them in horror. "Hold on, guys. We aren't going to run the whole way, are we?" They spent the first night in a Pokémon Center. It was already dark outside, the sun having set hours ago. It was quiet at the cafeteria's table as everyone finished eating their burgers. The atmosphere was drowsy, pensive. Ash gulped down the last of his soda and looked around. Pikachu was on the table, licking his plate clean of any excess ketchup. Bonnie was whispering to Dedenne as she fed it pieces of her fries. Serena stared at her half-eaten burger, a deep frown on her face, while Clemont doodled in his notebook, only pausing occasionally to yawn into his hand. Kiave had spread the map of Kalos on the corner of the table, although Ash could tell he wasn't really studying it, the look in his eyes distant. And Lana was. She was looking at him. "You should call your mom," she said quietly, when Ash gave her a curious look. Ash rubbed his neck. "Oh, maybe a bit later," he said nervously. He knew his mom was going to be mad at him, and he really was too tired to argue with her. Lana didn't back off. "We probably won't stay in a Pokémon Center tomorrow, and you shouldn't call her with our poke gear from the forest. Here you will have a good connection and a screen, so she can see you." Ash hesitated still. "I could call her in the morning, before we leave." "It would be already late in Kanto then and she might be in bed," Lana argued. She had a disapproving look on her face. "Come on Ash, go call her now." "Oh man. I guess you're right," sighed Ash. He stood up and noticed everyone was now looking at him. As Pikachu clambered on his shoulder, he shrugged and aimed for a casual grin. "I'll see you guys in the morning, right? You should go to bed and I'll come after I've called my mom." "Yeah, all right," Kiave said, and the others nodded along. They were watching him with barely hidden curiosity Ash wasn't willing to examine just then, so he nodded one last time and slipped into the reception hall where the phone booths were located. He missed his mom, as he always did, but he really didn't want to talk to her about Lysandre. About any of the things that had happened to him in the past 2 days, let alone during the crisis. He had barely mentioned Greninja to her when he had come home after Kalos. She knew he got into dangerous situations wherever he went, and she knew he was keeping quiet about a lot of them. She had, after all, even been involved in few incidents herself. But she also knew there was nothing she could do about it, so it was easier to just ignore it, brush the bad under the carpet and focus on the good instead. Ash's new Pokémon, his friends, his visits to Kanto. How he was doing with the gyms or more recently, in school. But, Ash supposed, as his finger hovered over the call button, it might be harder to pretend everything was going great after the calls Professor Kukui had made to his mom. Usually, when things were bad, there was no one to contact her. And Ash preferred to call her only after the bruises had faded and tell her about the awesome new legendary he had seen, or the great adventure he had experienced. But he had promised to call to Professor Kukui and to Lana, so he pressed the button and waited. It didn't take long before her face popped up on the screen. "Hi Mom," he had time to say, before she exploded. "Ash Ketchum," she began, hands on her hips and eyes piercing. "You finally had the sense to call. What were you thinking? Do you have any idea how worried you made the professor? You left Alola in the middle of the night. How did you think that would be a good idea? Poor Kukui was almost crying when he called me. I really hope you apologized to him." "Sorry, Mom," Ash grumbled. "I wish you wouldn't do these things," she continued with a calmer voice, though she was still clearly exasperated with him. Ash did recognize the worry and relief under the angry demeanor, so he wasn't too bothered. It was great to see his mom again. On his shoulder, Pikachu perked up. "Pika," it said, and Delia was instantly smiling. "Oh, Pikachu. Hi there," she waved her hand and Pikachu made a happy noise in response. Ash decided to use the moment to his advantage, so he quickly said, "So anyway Mom, I just called, 'cause we just left Lumiose City and we probably won't visit any Pokemon centers in a while. But I'm with Lana and Kiave and Serena, Bonnie and Clemont are here too. So, we will be fine. I just wanted to." "Why are you back in Kalos?" Delia asked then. She wasn't smiling anymore, and Ash wasn't sure. She looked tired, and serious and scared. Ash felt his answer die in his throat. "It isn't about the crisis, right?" his mom continued, when he didn't answer straight away. "Ash, it was already over last year, when you came back home, wasn't it?" "Mom, why do you always need to get involved?" Her voice was wavering now, even if she did her best to appear stern. "It was over, and you were safe, and just tell me this has nothing to do with it." He couldn't. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly, and something in her eyes crumbled. Ash took a breath. "I really did think it was over. But there's still something I gotta do. You don't have to worry, I'll be fine." "I know you will." Her eyes were shiny, and she blinked a few times. "I'm glad you have your friends with you, and Pikachu, as always." Pikachu nodded, and Delia looked straight at it. "Take care of Ash, all right?" Pikachu." Ash stifled a yawn. "I'm going to bed now," he said. "I'll call you later." "Make sure you do," she answered. "Good night, Ash. Be careful." "I will." "Good night, Mom." They managed one last smile at each other, and then the call ended. Ash stared at the dark screen for a long while before picking up his bag and finding his way into his room. The morning came bright and chilly, and everyone was in a much better mood. After breakfast, Lana was sitting on the front steps of the building, playing with Poplio. It was clear that the young Pokemon was still slightly confused what was going on, and why they had left Alola in such a hurry. Still, it had picked up on Lana's curious energy and was eagerly exploring the new surroundings. "Poplio, I think I will put you in the Pokeball when it's time to leave," Lana said. Poplio looked at her in surprise, and it stopped playing, hopping up to her. "Pop? We will be walking for the whole day and you would get tired, and I have a heavy backpack to carry." Poplio looked disappointed for a moment, but it nodded eventually. Lana picked it up and hugged it. "I knew you would understand," she smiled, burying her face into its neck for a moment. "When we take a break, you can come out, of course. Kalos it seems great, the nature here is really pretty, but it's not like Alola. I'll make sure to find you a lake or a river, so you can have a swim at some point." "Poplio pop." Poplio cooed happily. Lana heard a voice behind her. "You're ready to go already?" She turned around and saw Serena stepping out of the center. Lana nodded, patting her full backpack. "Yeah, I got everything here." Serena sat next to her, turning her face to the chilly, gentle wind. Smiling, she closed her eyes. "Oh, such a nice weather today." "Yeah," agreed Lana. It was so early in the morning that the sun was still hidden behind the trees, but the sky was cloudless and luminous above them. "A bit cold, though," she added, rubbing her bare arms. Serena laughed, bright and friendly. "I guess you're used to a much warmer weather in Alola, huh? I hope you got a sweater with you. The nights can get a bit chilly." "Yup, don't worry," said Lana. She leaned on her hands, staring up at the vast sky. A single cloud was floating in the distance, and Lana imagined it looked a bit like a Kyogre. "Anyway, I don't really mind the cold." I love water-type Pokemon. Exploring the sea is my favorite thing to do, and the water does get freezing when you go deep enough. Wow, that's cool, said Serena, sounding genuinely impressed. Is it your dream to be a water-type trainer? Lana shrugged. Not sure yet. I only have Poplio so far, so I don't have much experience with training. I mean, I used to think I would only get water types, but spending time with Ash has kind of changed my mind. His team is amazing, even though he doesn't choose what he's gonna catch by the type at all. She frowned, thinking about it. Well, I guess he doesn't really choose, period. The Pokemon just come to him, it seems like. This time, Serena slapped a hand on her mouth as the laugh burst out of her. Oh, tell me about it. She smiled to herself for a moment. Huh, seriously though, I guess he only caught Talonflame. I mean, Fletchling. With an actual battle. And he hatched Noivern from an egg. But the other three just kinda decided on their own accord that they wanted to join him. It really opens your eyes, doesn't it? Thoughtful, Lana nodded. I think that's what I'm going to aim for, too. I want to earn the Pokemon's trust before I catch it. The type shouldn't be the first thing that makes me decide. I want the Pokemon to feel so safe and happy with me that it wants to stay. You are going to be an amazing trainer, Lana, Serena said softly. The door clicked behind them and the rest of their group burst out, chatting and laughing. Ash, as hyper as ever, hopped down the 3 steps in one jump, landed badly on the gravel and almost fell on his face with a strangled yelp. Pikachu dashed after him, ears down with second-hand embarrassment. Oh, here you girls are, grinned Bonnie. She leaned casually against Serena's shoulders and they watched the scene with amusement. A mechanical hand had come out of Clement's backpack and was now dangling Ash in the air by the back of his shirt. Bonnie giggled. Well, at least Ash is excited. Lana couldn't help her wide smile. This just might turn out to be fun. You know, me and Bonnie never really thought we would go traveling, Clement said to Kiave as they trailed behind Ash and the girls. Well, at least not in many years, and not together. I always knew Bonnie would leave the second she got her first own Pokemon, but I was pretty happy just managing my gym and inventing things. I guess I didn't know any better. Kiave considered his words for a minute. That thing about traveling, it's a bit different in Alola. You know, we don't have that whole Pokemon journey you do. Of course some of us leave and travel through other regions, but most Alolan people live their whole lives on the islands. And those who want to challenge themselves participate in the island challenge, but that's about it. Clement chuckled. Oh, don't get me wrong, I didn't understand the itch some kids my age had for traveling either, not until last year. He gazed ahead to the very familiar image of his friends' backs as they walked ahead of him, on their way to somewhere unknown and unexpected. He sighed, smiling almost wistfully. It's weird. You can't really fathom what makes the experience so special, not before it's over. But when it is over, you just feel restless. Aimless. Like you need to rethink your whole life. Did you? Asked Kiave, and as Clement raised a questioning eyebrow, he added, rethink your life? Oh yeah, I guess we all kind of did, Clement said after a short pause. I had to rebuild Clembot from scratch and manage a gym in a building that had been used as a Team Flare base. Serena left her whole life behind and went to find herself in another region. Bonnie, she's older somehow, and Dedenne is basically hers already. She really grew years during our less than a year trip. I think your journey might have been slightly more dramatic than the usual, Kiave said with a touch of humor. Didn't it end with the crisis? I can't imagine that going back to normal life after that could have been easy. Clement glanced at him, surprised. Then he let out a short laugh, the tone somewhere between nervous and dismissive. It didn't end there, but yes, I guess the crisis was a big part of it. Not really the part one want to remember it by, though. But it definitely did change my life, and in more ways than one. Kiave noticed how Clement had the same vague way of talking about the crisis as Ash had, but he decided to not press any further. Instead, he chose another topic. What else happened during the journey, then? Did you meet any legendaries? He remembered the conversation from the previous day, and added. Besides Zygarde, I mean. Clement grinned, but quickly turned his head away and got more serious. Oh, he choked out, even if it was clear he had wanted to say something else. He glanced at Kiave. Brows furrowed. Yeah, we did meet some legendaries. But I think those are stories that we should tell you together, and at a better time. How mysterious. Kiave could feel the annoyance rising in him. Still, he nodded, letting out an acknowledging sound. He could understand that the event where the sighting happened must have been pretty overwhelming for Clement and the others. After all, he could distinctly remember how he had felt when Tapu Koko first appeared in front of them, in plain daylight, and challenged Ash to a battle. As a silence settled between them again, Kiave got the feeling they weren't really on the same wavelength with Clement. He didn't think Clement was being intentionally rude, and he did like the guy, but something was off about their conversation. Maybe it was a Kalos thing, this unwillingness to speak about personal experiences. Or maybe it was an Alolan thing, to ask too many questions and then overshare. Or maybe, thought Kiave. As the vivid image of Ash leaping off the edge of the schoolyard flashed in front of his eyes, it was an Ash thing. Things seemed to happen around Ash that were hard to explain, and Ash definitely got himself into these situations way more often than what was normal. Thinking about this, Kiave realized then that he had only known Ash for a few months, and those months had been way more exciting and eventful than his whole life before that. If you spent almost a year on the road with him. Kiave swallowed, the truth of it finally dawning on him. Yeah. There would be stories to tell. Probably too many to sort through. Especially when they needed to focus on the immediate threat that was Lysandre and his plans with Greninja. His musings were interrupted with a shout from the group ahead. Wow, a waterfall. Kiave could only watch as Ash and Lana sprinted off the path and into the thick forest. He and Clement jogged up to Bonnie and Serena, who were standing on the spot with exasperated smiles. I think it's about time for lunch, anyway, chuckled Serena, still looking into the woods. Following her gaze, Kiave could see the shapes of their friends joyfully kneeling over a glimmering river. I think you are right, agreed Clement, and together they trekked into the flickering shadows of the lush forest. Greninja was slowly going insane. It had been in the small room for at least 3 full days now, staring at the metal walls and floor, the only light streaming in from the small opening in the door, located slightly above its eye level. The light was constant, unchanging. Greninja had no concept of day and night anymore. It could only count the passage of time by the quick, regular interactions it had had since its capture, that was, when one of the faceless, nameless men slipped food and water through a gap at the foot of the door. It had been there since it had woken up after Lysandre's torture. Well, Greninja assumed it had been meant as torture, though the only thing it had accomplished was the bond breaking between Ash and it, pushing them both into deep unconsciousness. Greninja didn't regret standing up to Lysandre, but it did regret having caused so much pain to Ash. Maybe, if it had surrendered when Ash had asked it to, they might still have their connection, a private upper hand to Lysandre. But, even when it had woken up shaking and weak and all alone, it had at least known Lysandre couldn't use it to hurt Ash anymore. Greninja was just finishing its evening routine. 50 rounds jogging around the room, 50 walking. The 50 jumps it had quite not managed this time. It had got up to 40 when suddenly the world had tilted and faded around it, the exhaustion and malnutrition making it weaker every day, the collar around its midsection heavy and suffocating. And still, despite all that, it craved sunlight more than proper food, the fresh waters of Kalos rivers more than a soft place to sleep. Greninja sat down on the edge of its dingy bed, blocking these thoughts from its mind. It would do no good to daydream. Greninja needed a plan. And it needed it fast. After what they had experienced few days ago, Ash wouldn't sit around for long. Not that he sat around ever, but especially when his friends were in trouble, there really was no doubt he would appear, sooner rather than later. Greninja wished this time he would think first, have an actual plan before running into Lysandre's lap, but that was probably wistful thinking. Ash's stubborn loyalty, his need to help others over his own well-being, that was after all one of the biggest reasons Greninja had chosen Ash as its human partner. Greninja needed to be ready for Ash's arrival. It had no idea how far away it could be from Ash to evolve, or if they needed to physically see each other before it could happen, but it sure was going to try it as soon as Ash had arrived in the general area. Every time someone approached its cell, Greninja would sit in absolute silence, trying to pick up anything that might reveal that Ash had reached Kalos. So far it had been unsuccessful, the grunts coming alone and as silent as Greninja was. There were no other sounds it could hear either. It must be locked away in the deeper levels or somewhere out of the way from the actual labs and common areas. That might turn out to be useful in the case it somehow got out of this room. The less there were humans blocking its way, the faster it could fight its way out. An hour later, there was the familiar click of a door opening at the end of the hallway, and Greninja sat up straighter. It could hear voices talking to each other in low voice. That was new. There were at least 2 pairs of steps approaching, and Greninja faced the door warily. Soon, a face blocked half of the opening in the door, and Greninja saw a familiar gray eye peeking through. Lysandre. Greninja stood up, despite knowing well that it couldn't attack Lysandre in its current state. It was way too weak to, and even if it weren't, the oppressive way around its stomach drove the point home. You will behave, right? Lysandre drawled, mild amusement in his voice. Greninja stayed silent, and after a low buzzing sound, the door opened, and Lysandre stepped in. Just the sheer size of him in the tiny room was imposing, but the way he was backlit by the lights in the hallway made Greninja want to take a step back. It didn't, even when it could feel its hands shaking at its sides. Greninja balled them into fists. I see you are still acting quite defiant, Lysandre remarked. Greninja tilted its head back, studying the man's face. He looked relaxed, an easy grin on his pale lips. I wouldn't have thought otherwise. You are Ash's Pokémon after all, aren't you? He must have trained you well. Greninja hated the way he talked to it, like it was a lesser being and thus stupid. Of course Greninja knew this already about Lysandre, but being so vulnerable in front of him and having to just take it, it was crushing. It made Greninja very pissed off and it wanted to show the human just how aware it was. Instead, it folded its hands in front of it, nodding shortly. He did. Lysandre looked momentarily surprised before getting himself back under control. This was the first time Greninja had spoken to him. Lysandre smiled widely. So, you are willing to talk, then? I have some questions for you, and I would love to hear your insight. You won't have to answer them today, of course, but in that case, I'm forced to put you back into this room. Greninja nodded again and added, I understand, out loud as well, just to get that disgustingly pleased reaction out of Lysandre. There was a plan forming in its mind. It had no power sitting all alone in this cell. But outside of it? Well, it might be even worse, but there was only one way to find out. And this might be the only way to find out more about Ash. How wonderful, said Lysandre, clapping his hands together. He grinned with all his teeth, a true predator's smile. I really hated locking you into this room like some low-life animal, but you must understand that I only did what was necessary. You were out of control and needed to calm down. I see that you have, now. Seething with barely contained anger, Greninja managed a quiet nod and then let its gaze fall to the floor, imitating a compliant posture. It could feel Lysandre's eyes on it, studying it intensely. Let's take a walk, the man said then, stepping back from the doorway. I have something to show you. Ash lay flat on the ground, staring up at the darkening night sky. He had been in a good mood today, loving the feeling of a gravel road under his feet and the adventure ahead of him. But the reality of it was creeping on him now, as everyone else had fallen asleep, exhausted from the day's journey, and he couldn't stop thinking about Greninja. If he was traveling alone, Ash knew, he would have run the whole way, going on minimal sleep. On some level on consciousness, he did understand what Alon had tried to warn him about, what he had meant when he had tried to make him slow down, but he found out he didn't much care. Trap or not, he was getting Greninja out of there. Even if it meant he would get in trouble instead. Well, better him than anyone else, right? Frustrated, Ash turned onto his side, disturbing Pikachu snoozing against his leg. Pikapi? It asked quietly. It must have spotted the scowl on his face, because it crawled closer, nudging his arm. I'm sorry I woke you up, Ash mumbled, wrapping an arm around his friend. Pikachu, instead of answering, nuzzled closer to his chest and sighed sleepily. Ash smiled down at it, and his heart felt slightly lighter. Thinking about all the times they had laid like this together, happy and content, he finally allowed himself to fall asleep. Wake up everyone, quick, Bonnie, get up, Serena. Ash's eyes were impossibly heavy with sleep, and it took him a minute to understand what Clemont was saying. The blonde was talking in a hushed, agitated voice, going around the camp shaking the others awake, all the while gathering up their things. Kiave, his hair sticking in every direction, eyes drooping, pushed his sleeping bag aside and sat up. What's going on, Clemont? Everyone was now awake, watching in exhausted confusion as Clement furiously stuffed away their cooking utensils. I was up the road, I woke up and took a walk, and I saw a white van parked just there and a couple of people looking around in the woods. I think they were Lysandre's men. This got everyone to wake up, and it took them only minutes to pack their backs, call in their Pokemon and wipe out any signs they had ever been in that place. They had just sneaked deeper into the forest when Ash heard voices behind them, talking in clipped, but still casual tone. They crouched behind a large rock formation and hoped they had gotten far enough to avoid confrontation. "You're sure your Fletchender saw a camp around here?" asked the other with a deep gravelly voice. "Of course I'm sure," answered the other, his voice a much younger one. "It wouldn't lie to me. I told it to only come back if it spotted the kid, and today it did, and it led us here. It must have seen something." "It could have spotted anything as far as I know," the older man roared. "That bird is still young and honestly, it doesn't seem too smart. Maybe it saw some other kid run through here and flew back to report that." The younger one hesitated at that. "Let's just check around, okay? We can't know for sure if we don't at least do that." The older man sighed with frustration but let out an agreeing grunt. Slowly, they circled the camp area, idly talking, and it was only Serena's firm grip on his arm that kept Ash from leaping around the rock and challenging them into a battle there and then. Finally, after what felt like hours, the voices faded back towards the main road and the kids could breathe again. "They were looking for Ash," said Lana, her voice odd. "What? We knew that already," frowned Kiave. As everyone turned to look at Lana, she drew herself up straighter. "I mean, they were only looking for Ash." Ash looked around and saw realization dawning on Clement's face, but he still didn't get the point. Luckily, Clement finished the thought. "They still don't know we are with him." "They think I'm coming alone?" asked Ash with wide eyes. "Oh, but that's good," said Serena, clasping her hands. "If they are only preparing for Ash, we still have a chance to surprise them." "Yeah, that's true," agreed Bonnie. "It's not good that they are searching from the air," said Clement with a serious expression. "On the main path we will be easy to spot, and they most likely have seen a reference photo of Ash and Pikachu. Pikachu aren't that uncommon in Kalos, but not many have them as primary partners, so it will draw attention." Ash and Pikachu shared a look, and Pikachu clambered up on his shoulder. It wasn't happy to hear it might be putting Ash and the others in bigger danger. Kiave raised his eyebrows and waved a hand towards them. "Just put Pikachu in the Pokeball while we are on the road. And you can walk behind us, so it will be harder for their flying Pokemon to recognize you." "The thing is, Pikachu doesn't go in the Pokeball," answered Ash with a shrug. Pikachu looked down, uncomfortable. Lana and Kiave stared at him. "What do you mean? I'm sure it can manage few hours at a time," said Kiave incredulously. "I'm not putting Pikachu in the Pokeball," replied Ash, steel in his voice, and Kiave backed off. "All right," he allowed, still sounding slightly dubious, "then we need another plan." The others had followed their exchange with mild concern. Serena cleared her throat, wringing her hands in front of her. "I might be able to make some sort of disguise for Pikachu," she suggested, though it almost sounded like a question. Clement stepped closer. "I don't have much stuff with me, but I could also try to design something." "You should make a disguise for Ash, too," Lana said to Serena. Serena looked at her, surprised, and soon they were both smiling slyly. "Man, I dunno about all this," huffed Ash, getting frustrated from all the standing around. "Maybe I should just go alone. If they spot me with you, then our plan is ruined. But if I get into trouble by myself, then you can still come help." Everyone was staring at him now like he had grown a second head. Ash didn't get what the big deal was, so he ignored them and turned to Pikachu. "Right, buddy? I kinda feel like running. I can't wait to get there fast and see Greninja again." A hand on his arm made him stop rambling and turn his head. Serena was looking at him with wide eyes. "Ash, just hold on," she stammered. "We are not letting you go alone," said Bonnie, scowling up at him. "Really, Ash, it would be way too dangerous," added Clement. "We are so close already," argued Lana, when Ash turned towards her for support. "Besides, we might not find the palace without your and Rollet's help." Ash looked at Kiave, but he just shrugged. "Fine," grumbled Ash, deferring for now. "But let's go already, we are missing time. No one objected that, and they picked up their bags and started back towards the path in silence, the argument weighing heavily between them. Lysandre had wrapped a blindfold around Greninja's eyes, and locked its hands behind its body, but luckily it had an excellent sense of direction. As they walked, it counted the turns they took and registered any distinct sounds and smells they came across into its memory. At some point, they went down few seconds with an elevator. 1 or 2 floors, maximum. Right before they arrived at their destination, they passed a room smelling strongly of human food. A kitchen or a canteen. "Sorry for the rough treatment," said Lysandre, sounding anything but sorry, as he unwrapped the blindfold. Greninja blinked few times, trying to adjust to the bright lights after many days in its dim cell. What it saw then made it want to put the blindfold back on and puke, in that order. They were standing in front of a window overlooking a testing lab. The lab was full of Greninja. Most of them were in tiny cages, some unconscious and some weakly sitting up, but one of them was laying on an operating table in the middle of the room. A lab-coated man was standing over it, injecting something into its arm. Rage overwhelmed Greninja. It stepped away from Lysandre, and with all its weakened strength, it crashed its body against the glass. It rattled but held. As Lysandre tried to grab it, Greninja slashed him with its tongue, slapping his hands away with brutal strength. It jumped against the glass second time, and this time, it heard a crack. It saw the Greninja in the room grow more alert, some getting a hopeful look in their eyes as they saw what was happening. But that was as far as Greninja got. Pain spiked through its body and its knees gave out. Unbalanced from having its hands tied back, it fell all the way on its side. As quickly as it had started, the pain stopped, and Greninja turned to stare up at Lysandre, who was now looming over it. Greninja had expected anger, but he looked happy. Lysandre crouched next to it. "You understand now, right?" he said with a pleasant smile. "You see how it could be with you, too." Greninja stayed silent, its throat constricting with pure fear. "I just need few answers from you, and when that's over, you and your friends there can go free." Lysandre smiled down at it like it was a newborn puppy, cute and completely at his mercy. "You are strong and well trained, and it would be a shame to ruin that. But I need to know why you and Ash can do what you do. That power, in the right hands, it would make one unstoppable. But why you seem to be the only one that has this special power, that I don't understand." Greninja wanted to curl up and cry, but at the same time it realized that Lysandre was spilling his great plan, so it pulled itself together and listened. "Is it because of you, or because of Ash?" mused Lysandre, now talking more to himself than Greninja. "I was thinking it was you, that it was something every Greninja could do with enough persuasion, but I'm starting to question that. Maybe Ash does have a rare evolution stone with him. I didn't see one on him when I met him last time, but it just might be hidden." Greninja didn't like this direction of thought, so it drew Lysandre's attention back to it, whining and struggling weakly on the floor. Lysandre chuckled, standing up. He stared Greninja straight in the eyes. "You must be shaken up. I will give you one more day in your room to recover and think about this, and next time I come for you, I'm expecting cooperation." Someone pulled Greninja up by its arm, a bag was thrown over its head, and then it was roughly pushed back towards its cell. They had a plan. It took a while, but eventually they did get Ash to agree to it. They were just outside of Santaloon City, the city only a small, gently sloping field down from the thickly forested area where they had set camp. The plan was this. Serena and Clemont would sneak into the city. "Not sneak," insisted Serena. "They would walk there like couple of ordinary kids. Serena would shop for clothes and other accessories that could be used as disguises. Clemont would look for any useful machine parts, and then they would walk back and continue the journey." In theory, it sounded simple. Still, while the Alolan kids, Ash and Bonnie, were setting up a place to cook lunch, Serena and Clemont argued over their plan for what seemed like the 4th time within as many hours. "Just put on some jeans and a t-shirt, you must have some with you," Serena huffed as Clemont crossed his arms and backed away. "I'm telling you it's not necessary," he said, his nerves making him uncharacteristically confrontational. "It's only a quick trip to the market and it's not like I'm that famous anyway." Serena eyed him, sternly but not unkindly. "You are, though, Clemont. You are recognizable. Especially after what happened last year." People have been coming from all over Kalos to see the Prism Tower and challenge you, or Clembot, specifically. Clemont opened his mouth to disagree, but stopped, his defenses faltering. Serena was right. His gym had been significantly busier after he had announced last year that he was taking challengers again. But it wasn't him that was famous, it was the building, and everything that had happened around it, right? Had he even been shown on the news feeds covering the crisis aftermath? Had there been interviews? He couldn't remember. Clemont glanced down at his trusty blue jumpsuit and then back up at Serena, who was looking at him expectantly. "They are not looking for us," he insisted then. "They don't know we are helping Ash, and if they wanted to question me, they would have done it already. I haven't been hiding." Serena crossed her arms. "They might be looking for you now, though, and even if not, you might draw attention in the city. And if Lysandre's men are in there, the last thing we want to do is to get noticed." Clemont felt cornered, but he took a breath and squared his shoulders. "I have so much useful stuff in these pockets. We can't know what we might need during the trip, if I don't have all the things with me." "Huh, I thought you just said it's only a quick trip to the market," Serena countered defiantly. "Why would we need anything special with us?" "Yeah, what even could go wrong, right?" came Bonnie's helpful input. She grinned up at them, having sneaked close while they were too busy arguing to notice. She laughed at the identical glares they gave her, but got more serious then, looking at Clemont. "What's the problem, big bro?" Clemont felt his body go tight with tension. He couldn't have really explained it, even if he would have wanted to. And he really didn't. The truth was, the jumpsuit was like an armor to him. He had had it since he had become a teenager, and since then he had only worn different clothes at home. At home, where he felt safe, he guessed. When it came down to it, Clemont knew he was a decent Pokemon trainer, but using Pokemon to fight wasn't always an option. And that was it. He wasn't the most physical guy, nothing even close to how Ash and Kiave were, but he could construct a weapon in under a minute from the pieces of machinery he had stored in the pockets of his suit. Without it, he felt defenseless. Weak. And there was no way he was explaining that, out loud, to anyone. Clemont ground his teeth together for a moment, before looking away from the girls. "There's no problem," he said to the berry bushes. "At least they wouldn't judge. It's fine. I will change into other clothes. But I'm taking my backpack with me." He glanced at Serena, who was giving him a curious look. "Yeah, of course," she answered, and shared a look with Bonnie. Clemont was too wound up to stay and talk about it any longer, so he picked up his pack and walked away. He passed Ash on his way, who was absently brushing his Lycanroc's fur, looking almost as frustrated as Clemont felt. For a brief moment, Clement's own anxiety was overwhelmed by the memory of Ash casually saying, "Maybe I should just go alone," like it was the obvious choice over a quick detour to nearest thrift shop. Yeah, he had seen Ash acting reckless, way more often than he could count, but this time it had been different. Usually he jumped into things in the heat of a battle or other situations where there was no time to really think. But this time, it had been calculated. Ash had had plenty of time to think about it, had heard their opinions and ideas, and still suggested that he would do it alone. It made Clement's skin crawl with worry. Shaking these thoughts from his head for now, Clemont ducked behind one of the massive trees and started unzipping his jumpsuit. After almost a year on the road with them, he didn't mind dressing in front of Ash or even Serena, but he was acutely aware that there were more of them now. And even though Lana and Kiave had seemed busy with the lunch preparations, Clemont would have felt weird undressing just there. So, hiding away and feeling strangely small and awkward, Clemont changed into a pair of barely worn jeans and a long-sleeved t-shirt he would sometimes wear during colder nights. He folded the jumpsuit carefully, though there was no way it would fit into the backpack. Taking a final deep breath, Clemont walked back to the campsite, trying his best to look casual. "You look different," commented Lana almost immediately. She set down the plates she had been holding, rounded the campfire and advanced on him. On her way, she grabbed Ash's cap from his head and took it with her. Ash barely reacted, his eyes far away, and before Clemont could either, Lana had placed it firmly on his head. Clemont took a half step back, exclaiming in surprise, "Wah?" Lana crossed her arms, examining him carefully. "Yup, now you are unrecognizable." Kiave was chuckling at him from where he was chopping vegetables, and Bonnie and Serena walked closer too, smiling widely. "Wow, big bro, you actually look kinda cool," Bonnie teased. It suits you. Serena agreed with good-natured amusement in her voice. But seriously, Clement, Lana is right. You look nothing like how people are used to seeing you. Even if we walked past a fan or an old challenger of yours, there's no way they would realize it's you. Clement shrugged, still feeling slightly uncomfortable. I guess that's good, he allowed. Anyway, I'm ready to go. Let's get this done so we can get on our way. He glanced at Ash, who still hadn't reacted to the situation. Ash was staring at the ground, his hands buried in Litton's fur, completely motionless. Clement frowned, an odd uneasiness creeping at the edges of his mind. Yeah, let's go, Serena was saying, returning him to the present. She grabbed his arm, pulling him along. We will be back in an hour, she called over her shoulder. Leave some food for us. Wouldn't count on it, Lana called back, and then they were off, wading through the thick forest, on their way to Santalune City. It was barely midday, but Lysandre couldn't wait any longer. He pushed away the blueprints he had been studying, called in his subordinates and marched over to the prison wing. He peeked through the opening and saw the Greninja sitting down, staring at the floor like it wasn't aware they were standing right there behind the door. It was mildly suspicious, so Lysandre wrapped a hand around the remote control in his pocket before unlocking the door. The Pokémon raised its head then, looking up at Lysandre with tired eyes. It probably hadn't slept that well, not after so many days in captivity and after what it had witnessed the previous day. Lysandre couldn't make himself feel any sympathy though, staring down at the distressed Pokémon. It most likely had been pampered and spoiled in the kid's care. It was about time it got a real taste of humans' power. Well then, he began, crossing his arms and smiling down at the Greninja. Are you ready to cooperate? The Pokémon nodded, letting out a vaguely affirmative sound. It was a shame his best Pokémon interpreter had been arrested during the crisis, Lysandre thought. Well, he would just have to make do with limited ways of communication. I'm glad, he said. He turned to face his subordinate. Celosia, wrap it up again. It won't try anything today, but I don't want it to see anything it doesn't need to see. Yes, boss. While Celosia went to blindfold the Greninja, Lysandre wandered out of the room and down the hallway. He hadn't felt this excited, this close to a massive discovery, since the moment he had witnessed Ash and his Greninja breaking their binds with pure energy surging through them. It had been magnificent. And finally, Lysandre was about to find out what was behind that power. They moved the Greninja to a plain meeting room, containing only a table and 2 chairs on the opposite sides of it. Lysandre sat down, and Celosia guided the Pokémon to the other chair and unwrapped the blindfold. It blinked for a moment before focusing on Lysandre. For the briefest moment Lysandre could see sharp intelligence in its eyes before its gaze clouded over and it lowered its head. Lysandre wasn't a fool. He knew the Pokémon was playing up its exhaustion and submission, but nevertheless, he was sure he always had the upper hand to any Pokémon, intelligent or not. And Greninja were, according to the excessive research he had done on the topic, generally quite clever and cunning Pokémon. So, he began. I know you understand me, but sadly, I don't understand you, so there is no point trying to talk this out. He slapped a green sticker on the table, on the left side of the Greninja. This means yes, true and agree. He placed a red sticker on its right side. This means no, false and disagree. He looked up at the Pokémon. Do you understand? It eyed him for a moment before moving its hand to touch the green sticker. Great, smiled Lysandre. If you are not sure, or the answer is more complicated than yes or no, use the space in the middle. If you refuse to answer, I will kill one of the Greninja I have in my lab. Understand? The Pokémon blinked and leaned back on its chair. One of its frog-like hands balled up into a fist and its shoulders tensed. Lysandre's smile widened. After a few seconds of clearly murderous thoughts, the Greninja edged its hand to the green sticker. Excellent. Let's begin, then. He narrowed his eyes, staring down at his prisoner. Does your trainer have an evolution stone? The Pokémon was tense, like a wire stretched to its limits and about to snap, but it reached to touch the red sticker. Interesting. What about any other energy stone or artifact? Red sticker again. Where did he learn to do it? The Greninja looked at him, something akin to a frown on its face. Lysandre corrected himself. Did someone teach it to him? No, Lysandre huffed, intrigued. Do you know other Greninja who can do the same? Red and then, uncertainly, to the middle. Lysandre was reminded of the research material he had stolen from Sycamore's lab. Oh, fine, I also read the ancient manuscript about this phenomenon, but frankly, I think it's bullshit. Nothing that powerful happens purely because of trust or friendship. He considered the Pokémon, who silently stared back. Lysandre rubbed at his chin. It must then be an extremely rare ability some of you have. But you would think, in that case, we still would have seen it happening more. Does Ash have any special training? The hand stayed in the middle. Do you think he has? The Greninja hesitated for a moment before brushing the red sticker. Lysandre leaned back on his chair, thoughtful. This interview was turning out surprising and frankly, quite fascinating. He flashed a smile at the frowning Pokémon. You are doing well. You shall be rewarded for your cooperation. But I still have a few more questions. The Greninja nodded, so Lysandre continued. Professor Sycamore wrote in his notes that when using this special form in battle, the trainer feels the same pain as the Greninja does. Is it true? The Greninja went tense again, its fisted hand drawing closer to its body. It blinked slowly, threateningly. Lysandre smiled, leaning on his elbows. Please, do answer. You don't want anyone to get hurt, do you? Tardily, it touched the green sticker. Lysandre pursed his lips, quite confused about the confirmation. That is unusual. Moves or abilities shouldn't affect the trainer. But this does seem to be something really special, after all. Lysandre paused, thinking. So, you get stronger, your appearance changes, and I assume at least some of the power comes straight from the trainer. Does Ash gain anything special from the bond? The Greninja placed its hand in the middle. You don't know? He hasn't told you? No, he hasn't said anything about it. No extra strength, quicker reflexes, visual changes? No. How about the pain? Does it affect him as much as it does you? He didn't faint during the finals when you did, but can it happen? No. Interesting. Lysandre mused, considering it sharply. The Greninja shivered then, eyes drooping. It must be exhausted. Lysandre crossed his arms. He, too, was about ready to move on to the physical tests. All right, this is enough for now. I shall take you to the lab now. If this indeed is an ability you have, or something similar, there should be a way to trigger it with an external power source. He stood up, his chair scraping the floor noisily. He smiled down at the shuddering Pokémon. Let's test that theory. Serena almost lost Clemont a few times in the crowd of the marketplace. Every time she turned around and Clemont wasn't there, she started looking for the blue jumpsuit, and every time, Clemont managed to surprise her by appearing out of nowhere. Come on, Serena. I hope you are done by now, came a voice right next to her ear, and she jumped, letting out an embarrassing squeak. Clemont. Don't sneak up on me like that, she scolded, red-faced, turning to face him. Clement's eyes widened under Ash's cap. Huh? I have been standing here for a few minutes already. Whatever, huffed Serena. She raised her shopping bags. Yeah, I'm about done. Did you get everything you wanted? Pretty much, yeah. He nodded, a rattling sound coming from his backpack as he bounced it slightly. We should probably head back. They elbowed their way out of the market and started walking back towards the camp. It was silent for a while, until Serena couldn't help but ask, what do you think about Kiave and Lana? Clemont glanced at her but didn't seem surprised. He had thought about it, too. They seem really nice, he began. Not very experienced with Pokémon, though. I was thinking the same, admitted Serena. I mean, they're super cool, like you should hear about how much Lana has explored the sea, how many water Pokémon she has seen. She's amazing. But, still, she only has one starter Pokémon. It's... Yeah, Clemont said, waving a hand. And Kiave has these big, strong-looking Pokémon, and he does seem like a good and motivated trainer, but I don't think he has that much experience. Like, real battle experience. Like we have, Serena said quietly. Clemont nodded, frowning at the ground. They won't be any match to Lysandre and his men. There was shouting in the distance, and Serena and Clemont raised their heads, staring into the woods. It came from the camp. They ran the rest of the way and arrived at the campsite out of breath and their hearts in their throats. First, they noticed the crowd of anxious Pokémon roaming around, and then, what was in the center of the commotion? Ash was on the ground, his head and shoulders on Lana's lap, his face pale and constricted with pain. What's going on? yelped Clement, rushing to kneel next to Chiave and Bonnie. What happened? Bonnie took hold of his arm, her grip almost crushing. We don't know, big bro, she answered, voice wavering. We were just about to eat, but he wasn't reacting to our voice. Lana went to check up on him, but he just faceplanted on the ground. Well, Lana did catch him just before. Lana snapped her fingers in front of Ash's face. There was no reaction. It's like he's not present, she mused. She poked him on the forehead. It's kind of like before, said Chiave, like what happened in Alola. Serena frowned. What, exactly, did happen in Alola? They all startled then. Ash was blinking up at the sky, his mouth opening into a confused O. Before they had time to react, he was pushing himself up and away from the group. He stood up, stumbled, and stayed on his knees, his back to them. His whole body was so tense that it was trembling. Ash? Serena asked with a weak voice. Are you okay? After a minute, Ash stood up, steadily this time, and turned to face them. He grinned wide, eyes sharp and brilliant. Yeah, I'm great. Greninja just evolved. He had been thinking about Greninja the whole day. When Rowlet came to a stop at a crossroad and slumped on the ground, sad and defeated, uncertain of the right direction, Ash felt an anxious twist in his stomach. He knew they had to be close. They had to be close, but they were on their own, in the middle of an unfamiliar forest, looking for a hidden place. He couldn't help but worry that when they finally found it, they would be too late. As Serena and Clement prepared to visit Santaloon City, Ash tried to focus on other things. He took care of his Pokémon, brushed them, petted them, checked for injuries. Occasionally, when he remembered to raise his head and look around, he saw Pikachu staring at him. It was worried about him, that much was clear, but Ash had no way to comfort it. There was nothing wrong with him, he just couldn't stop thinking about Greninja. And when it happened, the evolution, it was intense. The rush Ash got from it felt different, amplified. The power surged through him, making his arms cramp and his fingers flex tightly around tufts of Lycanroc's fur. His heartbeat sped up and the world around him focused into something much clearer, sharper. He saw the campsite like it was the first time, the big trees, the colorful bushes and flowers, the blue sky peeking through the treetops. He turned his head and saw his friends huddled around a campfire, laughing and stirring a pot of something that smelled incredible. He saw Pikachu, Lycanroc, Rowlet and Litten staring up at him with varying expressions of concern. And then, he sensed it. Greninja. It felt amazing. Greninja rose from where it had been kneeling, staring Lysandre straight in the eye. The man took a step back, bewilderment clear on his face. It worked, he whispered. He glanced at his assistant, who was holding the strange device that had just shot a powerful light into Greninja. The young man was standing there with white-knuckled hands, shocked still, staring. Slowly, Lysandre's features stretched into a triumphant grin. It worked. Greninja barely heard him. The feeling of Ash was so much, so intense, the power that now flowed in its veins made it felt like it had grown double its size. I missed you, it sent, more of an emotion than words, and Ash responded in kind. Barely seconds after that, Greninja's mind flooded with overwhelming worry that was not its own, with, are you okay? Where are you? What happened? And million other thoughts and questions. Greninja squeezed its eyes shut. Stop, it forced through the noise, and Ash's mind went deathly quiet. Greninja couldn't afford to reconsider this, to worry about the downsides of the connection they had and what harm it could possibly cause, so it continued, with equal force. Look. The presence of Ash settled on the back of its consciousness and it could finally focus on what was happening around it. Lysandre was leaning towards the cage Greninja had been locked into, studying it closely. So that is all it took. He murmured, rubbing at his chin. Just the standard energy pulse. No evolution jewel needed. No battle situation or aggression. Unless. Greninja stood up straighter, feeling the energy of the shuriken pulsing on its back. Its vision felt sharper, more focused, like the rest of the world was suddenly moving slower. Its body was demanding action, every fiber of its being ready to attack. But Lysandre was holding the remote control in his hand, his thumb lightly resting on the button. The man had fallen quiet, unreadable expression on his scarred face. Then, with a final look at Greninja, he turned around and commanded his closest underling. Celosia, call in the guards and organize a search of the perimeter. And do it quietly. The kid might be close by. Yes, boss, the woman, Celosia, responded crisply before jogging off. Lysandre turned to the other goons standing nearby. You two, stand back but stay here for now. We need to move the Greninja back to its cell soon. The men obeyed and took positions, and Lysandre spun on his heel and marched back to Greninja's cage. There was a gleam in his eyes and a half-smirk stretching his lips. He clapped his hands together. Look at you. He chuckled, a real sense of marvel in his voice. Aren't you magnificent? Greninja stayed silent, unmoving. If it wanted to escape, it couldn't allow itself to be confined back to the cell. But it couldn't fight Lysandre, not there, not when he had so big of an advantage. It would have to wait for the right moment. While Greninja scanned the room as inconspicuously as it could, Lysandre picked up a laptop and started typing on it with one hand, glancing back and forth at Greninja. The changes are small, easy to miss if you don't know the species well, he murmured to himself. The red headpiece is probably the most noticeable part. Though on its back, the shuriken. From the edges of its mind, Greninja felt Ash demanding attention. Where are you? He was thinking. Just hold on, Greninja, I'm coming. Greninja didn't know its exact location on a map, but closed its eyes briefly, focusing on the route it had taken while looking for Lysandre. It had met a nice farmer just outside of Santaloon City, from where it had dipped into a nearby river and swam for about half a day upstream until it had found the hiding spot looking over this compound. It tried to visualize the journey as vividly as it could, about how the trees around it had grown thicker and taller the longer it swam, how the compound had looked from above, adding in the basic layout of the fences and gates as accurately it could remember. Lysandre's sharp voice interrupted its focus. Hey, what are you doing? Look at me. Annoyed, hoping it had been clear enough for Ash to understand, Greninja did. It opened its eyes and glared up at the man, steady and unafraid. It would all be over soon. Ash was coming. The pullback into his body made him lightheaded, and for a second, he didn't know where he was. Ash scrambled up and instantly staggered. He found himself kneeling, his body shaking with excess, unfamiliar energy. He took a few breaths, forcing himself to relax. He leaned down and pressed his palms against the solid earth. Slowly, the overwhelming feeling transformed into something much steadier, warm and powerful, like a second heart inside his chest. He smiled. It felt good, right? Ash? He heard Serena ask behind him. Are you okay? Pikapi? When Ash stood up and turned around, he saw all his friends huddled down on the ground, staring up at him in varying states of shock. Pikachu was at his feet, and the look in its eyes was not exactly concerned but beyond that. Heavy. It knew something had changed. Yeah, I'm great, he said, grinning. He felt amazing, actually. Greninja just evolved. The silence for the next few seconds was deafening. But, stuttered Clement. Ash looked at him properly then and blinked. The blonde was, for a reason Ash couldn't even begin to comprehend, wearing his cap on his head. Ash, how is that even possible? We must still be quite far away from it. Wow, does this mean it escaped from Lysandre's place? Asked an excited Bonnie. Did you see it again? Asked Lana with narrowed eyes. Ash, what happened to you? Demanded Serena. Why were you unconscious? Why did it happen now? Questioned Kiave. What change? Pikapi Pika Pikachu Pika. Said Ash. He rubbed at his neck, wondering how he was explaining this. He was still slightly trembling with excess energy and he kinda, really wanted to go for a run. Finally, he settled with, man, I don't really know what happened, guys, I think Lysandre somehow did it. This started another round of shouts and questions from his friends and it took a minute for them to realize they would also need to leave time for Ash to answer. One by one they quieted down, and Clement cleared his throat. Right, just start from the beginning, huh? He began. What exactly is this connection between you and Greninja? Right, said Ash. He hesitated for a few more seconds before nodding with determination. I guess I haven't really explained it to you. You see, me and Greninja sometimes do this thing where I can see what it sees. Before all this stuff happened, it used to be just these quick flashes I saw because Greninja had to show me something important. Like you guys remember when we thought Greninja got run over by that truck, but it was actually under it. He pointed at Serena and Bonnie, who nodded silently. But today, and earlier in Alola, it was kinda different. I was there with Greninja for a long time, and I guess I was unconscious here during it. And you saw Lysandre there with Greninja? Asked Serene quietly. Yeah. The first time was just after Greninja got caught, but this time it was in a different room and it had just evolved back into Ash Greninja. Lysandre was there and his assistant had this weird machine in his hands. I think Lysandre called it something like the energy pulse, and he was talking about it, like he thought it was the thing that caused Greninja to evolve. Clement looked thoughtful. So, he shot some sort of an energy pulse at Greninja and it gained the power to evolve? I guess it could be true, though there must be something else going on too. Did you do or experience anything different today, before it happened, Ash? Ash paused, puzzled. Huh? What do you mean? I mean, the Ash Greninja form is something you two always do together. According to my data, you need to be in perfect sync for it to work. But we don't even know where Greninja is. How could it just happen like that? Clement threw his hands in the air, exasperated. Everyone else was also staring at Ash expectantly, waiting for an answer. Ash grinned nervously. I dunno. I guess I was thinking about Greninja more than usual. And it must have been thinking about me. And the power machine must have helped too, because usually when we evolve it's like wham. You know? Ash squeezed his hands into fists and held them in front of him, like preparing for a fist fight. But this time it was more like bam. Like really strong. I thought I was gonna explode. He stretched his arms wide, imitating an explosion. He looked at his friends. Everyone was still staring. Bonnie tilted her head to the side and Serena's mouth was slightly open. Kiave scratched at his hair. 1 second. 2. Wow, you're weird, said Lana. You believe it happened because you were thinking about Greninja? Repeated Clement, incredulously. I didn't know that was possible, said Kiave with a furrowed brow. Did you? Ash shrugged, smiling. I mean, we never tried it before. Clement slowly shook his head. That is true, I guess, he weakly agreed. He still seemed a bit shaken, and he was still wearing Ash's cap. Ash let out a laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. Could I have my hat back, Clement? Oh, sorry, of course. The blonde squeaked. His hand flew up to touch the hat instinctively. The tension broke a bit, and everyone chuckled, relaxing. Clement handed the hat to Ash and smiled. Thanks for the loan. Kiave stepped away and crouched by the pot of food that was still steaming over the now extinguished fire pit. Hey guys, let's eat our lunch, he called, and the group agreed enthusiastically. When everyone was full and satisfied, the others packed up their belongings while Serena went through her shoppings. She modified a toddler's Chespin costume to fit Pikachu and Ash, with some hesitation, agreed to wear a blonde wig and a brown, oversized jacket. Chespin, laying on the grass with a full stomach and a wicked grin, found the costumes very amusing. Bunnelby had to step in before Pikachu got too riled up by the teasing and shocked them all. When Serena was done, Ash told the group about the route Greninja had shown him. It's pretty close, he explained. He waved his hand around vaguely. It was maybe, east from here. And that was when Clement pulled out his maps and together, they figured out the most likely direction they should head to. Few hours later, they were back on the path. Ash was on the lead, fueled by new determination and anxious energy. Pikachu was curled up in his arms, as it had trouble running in the baggy costume. Man, I dunno about these clothes, mumbled Ash when the wig blew on his face and made him sneeze for the third time. Pikachu peeked its head up, eyes desperate. Pika. You too, huh? Chuckled Ash. I'll figure something out, don't worry. There was the sound of running steps and Serena appeared beside him. She grinned when she saw them, dressed ridiculously, and Ash rolled his eyes. She quickly schooled her face back to a more neutral expression. Hey, she breathed, an edge of laughter still in her voice. Hey, answered Ash, smiling despite himself. So, how are you doing? After all that? Ash kept his eyes on the path ahead. I'm fine, he said. Really? She didn't sound convinced. Ash glanced at her quickly. Yeah. You are not thinking about doing anything reckless, are you? Ash startled by the direct question and almost dropped Pikachu. What? No. Even to his own ears, it sounded like a lie. He could see that Serena was thinking the same. Good, she said, giving him a pointed look. After a beat, she asked, How about Greninja? Is it doing okay? Ash hummed, thoughtful. It was surprise. About evolving. I think it was also feeling kinda tired and irritated. But it wasn't afraid of Lysandre. It knows it's stronger than him, and that me and it can beat Lysandre no problem. It was so happy to hear from me. It really missed me, he trailed off with a sigh. Serena touched his arm gently, and you really miss it. Yeah. They walked in a pensive silence for a while, until Serena sprinted few steps ahead of him and smiled, all teeth and bright eyes. Ash, we are so close now, she declared encouragingly. We know where we need to go, and you are connected with Greninja again. You will instantly know if something is wrong with it. It won't be long before we see it again. And when you two are back together again, I know nothing, especially Lysandre, will stop you. Ash swallowed, glancing down at Pikachu and then back up at Serena. The burning, good energy from the evolution had faded a while ago and Ash's mood had been slowly clouding over by anxiety all over again. But Serena's words made something in him stir and wake up. He felt his heart pick up a beat and his fingers tingling with anticipation. He ground his teeth together, looking ahead. There was no way he would get defeated by Lysandre, not before they had even faced each other in person. His temper flared and he grinned. Man, you are so right, we really are close now. It's gonna be so good to see Greninja again. I just gotta focus on that. Back in higher spirits, he pumped his fist, jostling Pikachu in the process. Thanks, Serena. The girl smiled, pleased. You're welcome, Ash. Ash hummed, not feeling happy, exactly, but more focused and determined. He gave Serena a look. So, how about you? He asked. Huh, how are you doing? Serena blinked. Me? Oh, her smile faded and she turned her head away, frowning at the ground. Good, I guess. Or, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it, you know? I have just been worrying about Greninja and you. Ash nodded silently, even though Serena wasn't looking at him. I'm sorry, he said, and that time she did look, her head whipping around, eyes wide. Sorry. About what? You shouldn't even be here, said Ash apologetically. I was supposed to come alone, you know? But Lana and Kiave wouldn't let me and then Alon called you three. Well, I'm glad he did. Serena huffed. She gave him a sideways look. I'm really happy you aren't here alone, Ash. Sure, it is dangerous and scary, but I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. You must know me well enough to know that. Yeah. Then, you know there's no reason to apologize, right? Ash nodded. Right. Serena smiled, her expression getting warmer. She looked at him closely. Can I ask you something? Sure. He said, blinking slowly. What did Lysandre say to you last time you met? I know you and Alon saw him in the Prism Tower, just before he went all crazy with the giant rock. I was just wondering, since you haven't told us that much. Alon seemed kind of upset about the whole thing. Dread, dark and heavy, curled deep in his stomach. Ash took a breath and felt it catch in his throat. Well, lots of stuff happened. He hesitated. The whole crisis was mostly just a big blur for him. He bit the inside of his cheek, thinking. He was really interested in what me and Greninja could do. I don't think he knew what it was, really, but he thought it had lots of power. And he wanted the power to take over the world. He shrugged helplessly, and Serena made a similar gesture. Lysandre's ramblings had always been slightly on the side of insane. Then he tried to, I guess he tried to take control of me and Greninja? He had this weird device. I don't really remember what happened then. I got really confused, and it kinda hurt a lot, and I just recall hearing Pikachu screaming. He glanced down at his best friend, who was looking back, steady and attentive. Serena had gone silent and pale, so he continued. That's when I got pretty pissed off. I told him I would never help him with any of his plans. Greninja was feeling the same thing, so our hearts became one. It evolved and that helped us to get free of the restraints. That was so awesome. He smiled at the memory. That had been one of the most powerful bond evolutions he had experienced with Greninja. He had been aching and exhausted for days after, but nonetheless, it had been pretty cool. It took him a moment to notice he was walking by himself. Puzzled, he turned on his heels and saw Serena standing on the spot, staring at him. The rest of the group caught up with her, looking between them with perplexed expressions. Serena? Asked Ash cautiously. Serena gaped at him. What did you say? About what? Restraints. Ash fell into an instinctive defensive pose. Yeah. Hey, what's going on? Demanded Clement. You were captured by Lysandre. Serena snapped, her voice thin. She brushed her hair away from her face, and her hand was shaking. He held you prisoner and hurt you? Ash shrugged haplessly. Well, that's why Alon was so worried. You didn't just have a Pokemon fight with him, he already once had you in his hands. Ash stood shocked still, eyes wide. Is it true? Asked Clement quietly. Bonnie clambered closer, grabbing her brother's arm. She stared up at Ash. Why didn't you say anything? There was no time to explain when all of it was happening, Ash weakly said. He didn't like how defensive he sounded. And when we won, I guess I kinda just wanted to forget about it. I thought I could. He frowned at the ground, feeling oddly embarrassed. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. Serena exhaled, and the fight was gone from her eyes. It's all right, Ash. Gods, it's not your fault. I'm sorry too, Ash, said Clement, and Ash blinked at him. I was so broken up about losing Clement that I didn't notice you had gone through something too. I should have been more attentive. Ash was completely abashed. Huh? No way, Clement. Clement was your friend. You are our friend too, said Bonnie, giving him a pointed look. Yeah, but, Pikapi. Ash looked down at Pikachu. What is it, buddy? Pikachu. Ash looked up. There was a Fletchinder circling in the air, clearly looking for something. Lana, following his gaze, said, we should keep going. Yeah, the forest is getting thicker, we should soon be pretty well covered by the trees, noted Clement. And we shouldn't just watch the air. There will be more guards around in the forest too, the closer we get, Kiave pointed out. Let's keep our eyes and ears open. Everyone agreed, and in anxious silence, they carried on. Do you think Lysandre still has that mind control device? Clement flinched. He turned to look at Serena. Her face was tense, eyes wider than usual. Clement, what if he uses it on Greninja? She continued, voice barely louder than a whisper. Clement glanced around. Ahead of them, rest of their group was walking with Ash, quietly talking, their tone light, making idle conversation to forget the awful situation they really were in. I don't know, Serena, he ground out, turning back to her. I think the police got most of Team Flare's gear when the crisis ended. At least everything that was in the Prism Tower and in their main base. He swallowed. But as I'm sure you remember, we did see the scientist guy, Xerosich, way later, and he still had some of his tech. Including a Mega Evolution Ray that could be used to control people and Pokemon. So, maybe they still have some of it. And they have had time to build new things, too. But Xerosich was arrested, said Serena blankly. I know, but not all of the scientists were. And I'm sure they have gotten new people involved too. There are always those who get exited by the thought of following a strong leader into a new and better world. Those who think they deserve it. Who think they are better than other people. They fell quiet. I hate this. Serena hissed then. I hate Lysandre. I hate that this is happening again. Didn't we do enough already? Why is it always us? Why is it Ash? Clement stayed silent. He didn't have any answers. I thought I was prepared, but I'm not, she went on. She was staring at the forest floor, eyes shining with unshed tears. I thought we were so amazing last time, so this would be no big deal. But what did I even do last time? None of us expect Ash even met Lysandre at all. In the end, I barely did anything to help. Don't sell yourself short, objected Clement. He stared at his friend in bewilderment. You fought multiple Team Flare members and helped to save Chespy, and during the final battle, you gave your all to protect Bonnie and Myron. For that, I will forever be thankful to you. He waited until Serena looked back at him. Serena, you are stronger than you think, he told her. Serena blinked rapidly, wiping at her eyes. Thanks, Clement, she whispered. She looked up, and Clement followed her gaze. Ash was laughing out loud, the ridiculous wig falling half of as he threw his head back with it. Now that they were in the deep forest, Pikachu was on the ground and mostly out of its costume, only the headpiece staying on, walking behind him. It was watching Ash too, head tilted slightly to the side, smiling gently. Clement grinned. Next to him, Serena choked out a laugh, and for a moment frozen in time, they experienced the surreal moment together. And then Ash doubled over, crying out in pain. "Can you de-evolve back?" asked Lysandre. Greninja could, but it wasn't going to. It glared at the man and shook its head. "Can you communicate with Ash in any way?" Greninja shook its head again. Lysandre leaned back against a table, rubbing his chin. Moving physically as little as possible, Greninja reached its focus away from itself and found Ash. It had been at least half an hour since the evolution, but Ash and his group were still in the same spot, not doing anything special. Greninja could sense vague thoughts about dinner and mixed with that, about the directions Greninja had shown him earlier. It didn't understand why they were still waiting around, but they probably had a good reason for it. Not wanting to disturb Ash further, Greninja pulled back and focused on Lysandre. "How much stronger are you in this form?" he was asking, considering it with narrowed eyes. "Well, you can't really answer that. Maybe I should test it in practice. Do a comparison. Not like I'm short on Greninja." He chuckled at his own morbid joke. Greninja didn't give him the pleasure of a reaction. Lysandre smiled unpleasantly. "Oh, don't be like that. I was." The lab door banged open and one of the goons burst in. "Boss!" he exclaimed, out of breath. "We searched everywhere, but we didn't find him. We sent out all the birds too, but they haven't returned yet with any news." Lysandre's relaxed facade cracked, and he snarled at the man. "Look again. He must be close by now. I want half of you in the forests, in full gear. Circle the area until you find him, or any sign that he has been there. Campsites, fresh footprints, pieces of clothing. And when you find something, I want to hear about it immediately." The man nodded stiffly. Drops of sweat were running down his face. "Okay, boss. And the rest of you, prepare the equipment down here. Get everything ready. If something is broken, fix it. Understood?" "Understood, boss." "Good. Tell Mabel to meet me at Lab 1, now." The guy nodded and took off. When he was gone, Lysandre turned back to Greninja. "Unfortunately, I have to leave you for now. Your trainer is quite a slippery one, isn't he? Avoiding my detection for this long. But don't worry, I will catch him." He flashed his crooked smile at Greninja. It suppressed a shudder, masking its anxiety under a blank stare. Lysandre turned to leave. On his way out, he said to the two goons standing at the doorway. "Watch that Greninja. Do not take your eyes off it for a second." He handed the remote controller to one of them, and then, he was gone. Everyone was shouting. Wrapping his arms around his midsection, he straightened his back again. He squinted at his friends. His vision sparkled with white bursts of light and his legs had gone numb. Someone was at his side, holding his upper arm firmly. His head was about to explode. He wasn't certain of what he had wanted to say, but he was pretty sure it had something to do with Greninja. He blinked rapidly but the world stayed blurry. The pain was so intense, so overwhelming, that he was sure someone had stabbed him in the stomach. But that didn't make any sense. He tried to focus. Lana's wide blue eyes were very close, straight in front of his. Had Lana stabbed him? No, that wasn't it. Ash shook his head slowly but regretted the movement immediately. It made the world spin, and he felt woozy. He heard Pikachu calling his name. Someone was pressing onto his shoulders, urging him to sit down. Ash fought against it. "No, I gotta." Then, as suddenly as it has started, the pain was gone, and Ash's knees wobbled. The world came into sharp focus again and he whipped his head around. Kiave was holding on to his arm, taking most of his weight as he staggered in place, trying to find his balance again. Ash shook him off, stumbling away. He gasped for air. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was hoarse. They were all staring at him. Ash coughed. He wondered if he had screamed out loud. His fingers were still tingling with traces of pain and his heart was racing. He looked at Pikachu. It nodded, eyes grave. Clemont was wringing his hands. He took a step forward, uncertainly. "Ash, what happened?" "They are hurting Greninja," he answered, and the words echoed in his head. All his senses were shot, and he took a step back, disoriented. That's when the pain hit him again. He almost bit on his tongue but managed to avoid it, grinding his teeth firmly together. He stumbled backwards until he hit a tree. He leaned against it and shut his eyes. His insides were on fire. Someone was drilling into his brain. He felt sick. Just hold on, Ash, someone was saying. It'll be over soon. Just hold on. I am holding on, he wanted to say. I'm fine, it's not me, it's Greninja. Ash opened his eyes, and he was in a cage. White walls surrounded him. Two men were standing on the other side of the bars, sneering down at him. Look at it, struggling to take it, one of them was saying. Not so strong and special now, are you? Ash felt the moment when Greninja became aware of him. Warmth spread through them, and suddenly, the pain was only a minor nuisance. Greninja rose back to its full height, and the men took startled steps back. Blue flame surrounded Greninja, and it slashed at the cage door, the lock mechanism giving away easily. Now the men were panicking. They scrambled back, the remote controller falling away from limp fingers. Greninja advanced on them, and with quick moves of cut, they were down. The pain was now completely gone, replaced by intense feeling of power. Greninja dragged their unconscious bodies to the cage and slammed the door shut, sealing them in. It pulled open the lab door and saw empty hallways ahead. A way out. Take care, thought Ash. I'm almost there. Greninja nodded, and with that, Ash was back in the forest. He looked around. He was still leaning against the tree, and this time no one was touching him. He blinked few times, taking in the terrified faces of his friends. When they saw he was back with them and not in pain anymore, they slowly relaxed. Serena stepped forward. Ash, he smiled. He still felt a bit shaky, but much better already. He pushed away from the tree. It's fine now. Greninja got away. Got away? What do you mean? Well, from the cage it was in. It's loose in the compound now. Oh, cool, cheered Bonnie. Greninja is way smarter than any of those guys. I'm sure it will find a way out. Is it okay? Asked Clemont. Are you okay? Ash nodded. Yeah, something happened, something new. I think it was the same device they used to herd it before, but we didn't pass out this time. I was there with Greninja, and we just got stronger. It only lasted for a few seconds, but there was this awesome blue light and everything. That sounds amazing. I wish I would have gotten some data off it, mused Clemont. It could have really helped me with my bond evolution research. There seems to be a lot we don't yet know about it, Kiave wondered aloud. Ash shook off his backpack and kneeled next to it. He opened the zip and started unpacking it, piling his sleeping bag, spare clothes and other unnecessary things on the ground. He took off the annoyingly oversized jacket too, adding it to the pile. The wig had already fallen off at some point. He pressed his cap back on his head. What are you doing? Asked Lana. Ash checked the now almost empty bag over and nodded to himself. He zipped it closed and picked it up again, throwing it over his shoulder. Ash. He looked at Pikachu, who scrambled up his leg and settled in the dip of his shoulders, a familiar weight that always grounded him. I need to go, he said to the group. I'll be fine. I'll see you at the compound? What? Wait a minute. Serena yelped. You are leaving us. I'm gonna run the rest of the way, and you gotta carry all our stuff, Ash explained. They were still balking at him. It didn't seem like they were getting his logic. Greninja needs me now. I can run, declared Kiave. He dropped his backpack. I can, too. Lana snapped. No, said Ash. He felt oddly serene then, sure of himself. Lysandre knows I'm coming. He knows that I'm really close. His men are everywhere in this forest. And they are only looking for me. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline. So, let them find me. If they spot me, they'll leave the forest immediately and you can safely continue closer. If they don't spot me, then I'll do my best to help Greninja out when I get there. That's not, we should think this through, sputtered Clemont. Let's just sit down for a minute and... I can't, said Ash. I have to go. He backed away, raising his hand. He gave one last wave at his friends, standing there frozen, staring. Ash turned around, ducked under a tree branch and sprinted off. Stairs. It needed to find the stairs. Greninja peeked around yet another corner of the hallway, but all the corridors looked identical. Every door along the way had been locked, and it didn't want to draw attention by breaking one down. The second its escape was discovered, it would be out of time. Greninja arrived at the elevator doors. On top of it, it showed the current floor number, -5. Greninja could hear the low hum of the machinery and the echoing clangs from the car of the elevator as it moved somewhere in the shaft. In a brief moment of madness, it wondered if it could climb up the shaft. No focus. What would Ash do? Greninja shook its head. That didn't help. Ash probably would try to climb up the shaft. Abandoning that trail of thought, Greninja kept going. Yet another empty corridor stretched ahead of it, but this time there was an opening in the middle of it. Greninja dashed there and with an overwhelming relief, saw a dimly lit stairwell with ways both up and down. It started up, carefully stepping on each stair to make as little noise as possible. The slow pace was frustrating, but it knew the chances that it would get out of there were hanging by a thread, and the smallest mistake would collapse it all. Greninja reached the next landing and stopped to listen. Someone else was also in the stairwell, way up from where it was, their hurried steps and voice echoing in the space. Greninja wasn't sure whether the person was going up or down, but it prepared itself all the same. It walked up one more flight and stopped again. The person was definitely coming closer, descending the stairs with a quick pace. Greninja retreated so it was mostly hidden from the above and waited. Damn it, I said I'm coming. The person was snarling. The voice was familiar. Greninja identified it belonging to the scientist woman, Celosia. It's a mess up there. Those new guys have no idea how to organize a search. I have to do everything myself. Idiots, the lot of them. She rounded the corner in the stairway, and Greninja attacked. It had to give it to her, she had perfect reflexes. Greninja went in with a cut, slashing at her diagonally from left to right. She leapt away, dodging just enough to keep her balance, but the radiophone she had been talking into flew past Greninja's head in a nice arch and clattered down the stairs. Oh, fuck. Greninja didn't leave her time to recover. It continued with cut, and this time it hit. With a breathless scream, she slammed against the wall. Still, her hand was already at her belt and before Greninja had time to stop her, she released her Drapion. The Pokémon seemed confused at first, before it grasped the situation it was in and how its partner had been attacked. Then it got angry. Celosia tried to mumble instructions, but the Pokémon took initiative, releasing Pin Missile at Greninja. Greninja blocked it with cut and jumped to one side, preparing for aerial ace. It had to finish this quickly, before others were alerted and it would get swarmed with enemies. Drapion tried to attack with Sludge Bomb, but Greninja was already moving. It dashed around the Drapion until it got disoriented and slammed it down with a fully powered aerial ace. Then, to finish it off, it used Water Shuriken. Greninja didn't stay to check if it was completely out. It sprinted up the stairs, still not seeing or hearing anyone else in the vicinity. It was breathless with exertion when it finally got to the top of the stairs, to a thick metal door that had "Roof Access" written on it. It tried the handle on it, but it didn't open. Greninja pushed and pulled at the door, frustration making it lose some of the level-headed control it usually always had. Growling, with a deep and animalistic sound, it slammed against the door. It stayed shut, with no sign it was even close to breaking down. Now there were new sounds in the stairwell. Rushed steps and shouts emanated from the ground level, just one floor below where Greninja was standing. Greninja crouched down, heart in its throat. It had trapped itself at a dead end, with no way to escape if the men decided to come up the stairs. Celosia. What did they say? Did she fall down? She was on her way down to the labs, someone said, his voice authoritative. Let's go. The sounds were getting quieter. Greninja let out a breath it hadn't noticed it had been holding. They were going down. But now Greninja was out of time. Celosia would tell the others, and Lysandre would then be alerted to its escape. If it wasn't out of the building by then, there would be no way it would make it. The doorways leading out would no doubt be well guarded, and the front lawn monitored carefully. Greninja sneaked down to the ground level and peeked out to the hallway. It was clear for now, so with the grace and quietness of a shadow, Greninja started towards the other end of it. A window then, maybe? Approaching sounds echoed from the adjoining hallway. Greninja picked a door at random, pushed on it and found out with relief it wasn't locked. It slipped in and clicked the door shut just in time. Greninja looked around. The room was small, eerily quiet with no lights on. It looked like a one-person office, with desk and a chair against one wall and a half-empty bookshelf against the other. And a window, small and dirty, on the opposite wall from the door. Greninja rushed to it and looked out. The window faced out the back of the compound, with a small area of outgrown lawn between the wall and the chain-link fence. And beyond that, the cliff wall rose just there, producing a deep shadow that fell over the area. It was perfect. Greninja forced the window open and dropped down between the wild bushes. Leaves and grass rustled as it waded through the long growth towards the fence. Someone whispered. Greninja, it stopped, blinking. It had been a long time since it had heard that voice. Greninja turned, and just there, so close it could reach out and touch him if not for the fence between them, stood Ash. To be continued. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know your thoughts and reviews in the comment box. Now I will see you in the next video.